Yeah.
Did you get through that last place?
No, I don't think you can.
Morning, everyone. I believe we're ready to go. We've achieved quorum, so we'll get started. And it is 10 a.m., past 10 a.m. just a bit. So welcome, everyone. I'd like to call the meeting officially to order. And we'll just start with the land acknowledgement.
Sorry, just one moment, members. Mic check. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Yeah, that's good.
Thank you.
Ben?
Yep, sorry.
Yeah, okay.
Sorry, we're just dealing with a little technical issue, and then we'll move forward with the land acknowledgement. Just one
Okay, good.
Chair, perhaps we can move forward with declarations while I track down the land acknowledgement. Sorry, just one moment. You can hear her?
Chair Robinson, I think you're muted.
You're on mute.
Oh.
I said very inspiring things, and you guys missed it. Okay, so do any of you wish to declare a conflict of interest? No, I see none. Okay, so that's good. And I'm going to just move on then, Chris-Anne. Just before we begin, I want to remind everybody that this is an open meeting, and as we go through the agenda, you'll be required to email requests to speak and to ask questions by email. So it can be as simple as this. Just shoot an email to Chris-Anne, and doesn't have to be detailed, just in the subject line, speak, subject line, questions, and then she'll keep you kind of in the queue. So I just want to remind everybody of that. And today, what we're talking about is the 2021 TTC and Wheel-Trans operating budget and the TTC's 15-year capital investment plan and the capital budget and plan. So we have a staff presentation on the deputations on both items. So I'll be holding those in my name because of that. This morning, we will hear first from staff, and staff will deliver a presentation on both budget submissions. And then after the presentation, the board will hear from the deputants that are lined up for item 1 on the operating budget, followed by questions and speaking. And then we'll move to item 2, to more deputations on the capital investment plan and capital budget, followed by questions and speaking. So hopefully that's clear to everybody. Again, if you want to submit a motion, please email your motion to Chris-Anne, the committee clerk. Yeah, and if you have any trouble with technical, shoot us an email and let us know if there's a technical issue for you so we can help you troubleshoot. So Chris-Anne, back to you.
Thank you, members. We acknowledge the land we are meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit.
Thank you, Chris-Anne. Well done. So before we move on to item 1, I just want to say that there was some a bit of frustration or feedback from the last meeting that the ombudsman had more deputation time. So I'm going to be very diligent about keeping everybody to their 5 minutes, whether you're on the commission or you're a deputant. I will try to give people a little warning at the 1 minute mark or 30-second mark. But there was just some feedback from via Twitter that people were frustrated that they wasn't enough extra time and they didn't. So I want to honor the Robert's Rules of Order and the 5 minute mark, and so I will be very diligent about that. Okay, so item 1 is 2021 TTC and Wheel-Trans operating budget. And I understand we're going to start this item off with the presentation. Chrisanne, did you want the deputations first or the presentations first?
Chair will proceed with the presentation first.
Okay, perfect. That's what I thought. Thank you.
And thank you, Chair Robinson. I'll start out and then I'll turn it over to Josie. So just want to say good morning to everyone. Welcome to our YouTube viewers and today's participants to the board's 7th virtual meeting, our special meeting dealing with the TTC's 2021 budgets. You know, before I introduce our interim chief financial officer, Josie Levita, to the commissioners with the TTC's proposed budgets, I'd like to take a few minutes and have some introductory remarks. You know, last year at this time, the board met to consider the TTC's proposed 2020 budgets. We were talking about preserving all of the TTC services and improvements that we'd worked hard to gain in previous 5 years. Gains such as the 10-minute or better network, the expansion of the Express and Blue Night services, capacity improvements to our subway and surface systems, our short-term reductions, our 2-hour transfers, and the list goes on. We were in a time of increased growth and increased demand from a growing population, right up until this past March, when we were carrying 1.1 million customers on a typical weekday. That was the reality just 9 months ago. Throughout the pandemic, we've continued to carry hundreds of thousands of riders who rely on us on a daily basis. Despite the hardships the coronavirus has caused on all of us, I can tell you that we're continuing to work hard at building a world-class transit system for the citizens of Toronto, and not just for today or the next 5 years. We'll have a 25-year outlook. The budgets before you today are also about preserving and enhancing services, but in a pandemic world. Our goal to this budget is to provide a safe, seamless, and reliable transit service, to be an inclusive and accessible service provider. We strive for financial sustainability and innovate for the future. Like other transit systems around the world, the pandemic has had a devastating impact on our business. But despite COVID-19's unprecedented service and financial impact, significant and tangible progress was made on key priorities in 2020. We addressed accessibility needs, our state of good repair, our new modern vehicles, and work on infrastructure, as well as our diversity outreach. The budgets before you today protect services where they are needed most, while preserving flexibility to adjust our services should demand increase during and post-pandemic. This proposed budget also keeps the cost of transit affordable by freezing fares, which is the right thing to do given the economic impact on riders and residents across our great city. In addition to being flexible, the demand-based service, the 2021 budget includes funding for the following: vehicle maintenance programs to ensure repairs are completed proactively prior to failure, our diversity and inclusion initiatives contained in the Embrace Diversity Action Plan, our improvements to wait times for our Wheel-Trans customers, a provision for capacity for business continuity and emergency management operations, preparation for city council and city direct initiatives, endorsed initiatives, planning for Line 5 at Eglinton LRT operations, as well as the other initiatives that we're working on, our service integration with our regional partners and an automated shuttle service, all ensuring the TTC is ready for and resilient to changes in the future. The TTC will also be seeking approval for the proposed 2021-2030 capital budget plan. Because of work undertaken during the budget process, amazing work, I would say, the TTC is able to fund an additional $1.11 billion in unfunded priorities and needs within the existing funding. So with that, Chair, I would like to call on Josie Levita to make her presentation to the board. Josie?
Thank you, Rick.
Madam Chair, it's Commissioner Carroll. Just before we start,
I'm typing as fast as I can to ask, could we have the presentation we're about to receive emailed to us so that we can keep track of what slide number we want to return to for questions?
Sure, I think that's possible.
Thanks.
Chrisanne,
I was in the middle of emailing it to Chrisanne.
Okay. So
Mr. Leary just
Chrisanne?
finished before I could.
Yeah, Chrisanne, is that possible?
Yes, Chair, we'll send that right now.
Okay, excellent, thank you. And back over to Josie now.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Chair, commissioners, and the public. I'd like to take a moment to thank my colleagues here at the TTC for all their hard work in helping move this budget forward to today's board meeting, and I'm pleased to present it for your consideration. So I will start on slide 1. I don't know if you want to wait till the members have it. No, we're okay? All right. So as you heard from Rick just now, this 2021 budget has a series of things in it, and clearly I think the most characteristic of it all are highlighted here. The demand responsive service that continues, it preserves priority service, brings bus service to about 101% of last year, and ensures more buses are on key routes. Again, you heard that it keeps the TTC affordable and there's no fare increase being recommended for 2021. The city's operating funding remains at the 2020 level, which represents a 0% increase, but it does include 796 million of the financial impact that we're projecting from COVID in 2021, which is partially offset by provincial federal Safe Restart funding that we heard about last week in the letter that was sent to us. And the amount that's being placed into this budget for 21 is about $612 million. And we'll talk about that more later. And finally, again, as Rick mentioned, through the process, we were able to add over $1.1 billion in previously unfunded capital works, 95%, which is going to our state of good repair. And it supports, of course, the fleet procurement plan that the board approved, and allows us to purchase 300 buses, plan for the procurement of an additional 300, plus 181 wheel-trans buses and 13 streetcars. Next slide, please. So when we came to you last year, we identified that our key service objectives and outcomes were identified as the following. And so we want to ensure, of course, as a primary goal of the TTC, that we provide safe, seamless, and reliable transit service. And particularly in the pandemic environment, that was really essential for us to do for all that needed it. Again, our key priority here is to ensure that we're transforming to solidify fiscal foundation and ensure that we can have financial sustainability going forward. Another key objective for us in 2021. And the work that we did through 2020 was to ensure that we were becoming and leading as a service provider that was inclusive, accessible, and equitable, and also that we could innovate for the future and ensure system resiliency. So next slide, please. So when we think about some of these key accomplishments for 2020, we stayed very focused on those outcomes. And despite COVID and its unprecedented service and financial impact, we did make significant progress in 2020. I won't list them all, they're there for you to see, but clearly I believe that the TTC was able to accomplish quite a bit in 2020. And in addition to that, we also had, of course, a very agile and I believe effective response to COVID-19. We delivered the demand responsive transit service throughout the pandemic for those that needed it the most in the areas that they needed it the most. We partnered with the City of Toronto to help the most vulnerable. We implemented a proactive safety measures. We had disinfection that began in January of 2020, and we made masks mandatory in July 1st of 2020 as well. Through our cost containment, we're expected to achieve $151 million in savings to help mitigate the COVID-19 financial impact. And through other works on our capital side, we were able to take advantage of the low ridership and actually accelerate capital work, both in our subway and in our easier access stations. Next slide. So through the pandemic, what we saw was service being initially provided at 85%, and then it increased as overcrowding became an issue. We ensured that the safety of our customers and employees, and we focused on education and communication to the public. Next slide. Keeping vehicles safe was a key priority for us with disinfection that was happening at least twice a day. And we continue to look at all efforts for 2021, including new technologies that are being piloted across all transit authorities. Next slide. In 2020, we also partnered very closely with the city to help the most vulnerable. We retrofitted TTC buses for Toronto Paramedic Services use throughout the community. We assisted the homeless with our colleagues with the Streets to Homes program. We distributed over 1 million masks with poverty reduction office staff and outside organizations. And we moved clients with our partners in shelter support and housing to hotels for heat relief, and that continues and will continue into 2021. Next slide. So throughout the pandemic, of course, we monitored our ridership and our revenue. We established a COVID dashboard with daily monitoring to ensure that we could keep track of what was happening. As you know, when we reported to you throughout the year, we saw a low of about 12% of ridership in the beginning of and throughout April, and saw peak recovery through the August period. And what we are seeing today through the gray lockdown is the ridership averaging out to about 30%. This both informed our service and our financial strategies. Next slide. We also monitored riders' use of the system throughout the pandemic so we could better understand it. In this slide, you'll see that we focused on examining who was riding, and based on the info to date, what we see here essentially is that amongst our different ridership groups, that our senior loss was essentially due to non-essential travel. For youth, it was essentially driven by virtual learning for high school students. And adults, it was work trip and events related. And for post-secondary, that too was for virtual learning. Overall, we saw the highest loss in adult riders by about 41%. Next slide. We also looked at the riders' frequency of use. What this chart shows is Presto usage by unique riders on a per week basis. To the left, you see a pre-COVID experience by the 4 groups, with purple being the most frequent using passes. Frequent riders of the green section of 9 uses per week. Occasional is the orange of 5 to 8, and infrequent is 1 to 4 uses per week. So that's the pre-COVID on the left. What this chart shows is that the steepest decline was amongst our frequent users, which is the green area, with the infrequent users predominantly and proportionally increasing, which is the blue. So definitely a different mix of usage. So with all this information, next slide, please. We also had our cost containment and cost management response. And as you recall, we really had 4 strategies that we brought before the board and implemented throughout the year. So we contained costs by realigning our workforce, looking at our expenditures, and deferring non-essential hiring. As you know, we matched service capacity demand that started at 85% of normal service and adjusted accordingly. We deferred some of our new service priorities that were implemented in 2020, and we revisited our capital program to see what the impact of COVID-19 had. In many cases, we deferred, but in some cases, we actually leveraged the opportunity and accelerated. Next slide. So I want to walk you through, spend a few minutes talking to you about the financial impact for 2020. So as you know, as we reported to you, and what we're seeing based on our third quarter projections is a passenger revenue loss of about $704 million. Added to that is ancillary revenue loss through our parking and advertising of about $24 million, and incremental costs of $31.5 million. In total, what we expect is about $760 million. When you look at that gross impact by time period, what we're seeing is a cost or an impact of about $51 million in March. Through the April to September period, $483 million. And through October to December, another $226 million. So how's this being funded for 2020? So those costs of 51 million will be covered from cost containment because they are not eligible for provincial restart funding, which begins April 1st. We also received funding for disinfection of $7.4 million for cleaning costs, and the Safe Restart funding for Phase 1 that takes us from April 1st to September 30th of $437 million. Last week, the province announced a Phase 2 transit allocation of $776 million, and that takes us from October to March 31st. We were able to use our additional cost containment savings of another $99 million, and therefore we could then allocate another $164 million from that Phase 2. So for 2020, the $760 million is covered by cost containment savings from our response, and another $609 million thanks to our provincial and federal partners. And with that, we know that 2020 impact will be fully addressed. Moving on to 2021 then. What we're seeing and projecting at this point in time is passenger revenue loss of $725 million, ancillary revenue loss of another $16 million, and incremental expenses that are now annualized and increased by another $55.5 million. In total, what we're expecting is about a $796.4 million financial impact. Based on a time period, we're seeing in Q1, $230 million value, and over the quarter 2 to quarter 4 period, another $566 million. When we look at the funding sources for 2021, we know that we have the $230 million of the additional allocation provided by the province. We also know that we have an additional allocation available to us that's based on ridership that would equal another 381.7. So for a total of 611.7 million. That is the residual amount of the 776 that's unused from the provincial announcement. We are working with our partners to ensure that we could try to use that beyond the March 31st period. So based on the residual that we're showing, there's another almost 185 million for which we do not have a funding source that is identified at this time, but we continue to work with our city and other partners to determine that source. I must say that when you look at all of the funding that's been provided by our provincial and federal partners, it's a total of $1.24 billion over 2020 and 2021. Clearly demonstrates a true partnership amongst the 3 levels of government and clearly acknowledges the role that transit plays both in the economy as well as in our contribution to mobility across the city and the region. Next slide. On the capital side, as I mentioned, in 2020, we deferred a series of projects, reduced the capital budget by $257 million, and accelerated another $48 million that brought the overall capital budget down by $208 million to adjust for COVID. For 2021, next slide. We again are accelerating some work to take advantage of the continued low ridership, particularly in our subway area. And we also have $2.8 million to install bus barriers that is actually potentially eligible for resilience funding. That's being submitted on our behalf through the city, and I believe was at City Council in a report last week, as well as some other initiatives that we'll be doing on our own that looks at further disinfection opportunities. Next slide. So when we turn our minds to 2021, some of the key challenges and risks that we see on our operating side is our continued need to ensure that we can engender public confidence in transit. Additional safety measures, more communication, and the ability to get riders back in. The financial impact of COVID-19 and for TTC in the city is a significant risk, and we continue to work with our partners. I think fundamentally the next question is, what does recovery look like and by when? When will we know when economic recovery happens, particularly in the downtown core? What will telecommuting patterns look like? What will our transit models require us to adjust to? Our work to continue to advance workforce diversity inclusion amongst all the COVID responses will be something that will be a focus for us, and we take that challenge up committedly. We're also preparing for collective bargaining negotiations, and we know that some of the work rules that we have to address will be things that will be discussed. And finally, preparing for Eglinton Crosstown in Q1 2022 with our ability to operate that is something that we're also preparing for. On the capital side, we continue to identify the need for funding for critical capital projects. We will highlight some of those later on. We wonder sometimes about the changes in intergovernmental funding, so the continuation of provincial and federal gas tax at current levels. We need to take into consideration the impact of the timing of provincial transit expansion projects. We heard about the timing for Line 2 and what that does to our RT. We know that there is a need for a maintenance storage facility by 2030 for Young North. And finally, we're working with Metrolinx to ensure that our capacity for planning and technical support of their projects is in place. Given TTC and city building objectives, we've determined that we need a long-term real estate investment plan that coincides with our capital investment plan, and you'll be seeing that in the first quarter of 2021. And we also continue to work on our asset management legislative compliance, which has been delayed by COVID. And finally, in our need to ensure that we have evidence-based decision-making, we need to ensure that our legacy systems are replaced to help support us. Turning to 2021, again, our focus is continues to be on the 4 same objectives and outcomes. So what you will see in these budgets and some of the work that we've identified are priority initiatives that are being funded in our base, that are new requests, or in our capital. And so I won't highlight all of these, they're here for your review, but clearly our need to ensure that we move forward with our matching of service to demand for where we need it the most continues. Our need for investments in vehicle maintenance is key, and on our capital side, we have a series of initiatives to ensure the safe and reliable system for the TTC. When we move forward on our ability to ensure fiscal sustainability, we continue to advance our business transformation, implementing service efficiencies and AG recommendations that are before you, and continuing to manage our overtime. We also have funding here to help us prepare for modern TO, which is looking at how we use office space in the most cost-effective way and ensure that our assets are being used at its highest value. And on the capital side, the continued need to ensure we have a capital investment plan, a real estate investment plan, and our IT projects moving forward are important to support these objectives. As an inclusive and accessible service provider, as you know, we've frozen TTC fares. We're establishing a target for gender recruitment, which will hope to see 4 out of every 10 operator recruiters being women. And we continue to apply equity lens to our service planning and our approach to our wheel transit service. The implementation of all the strategies that you've just approved are also funded here. As well, on our capital, we've ensured that the easier access is now fully funded for Warden and Islington, and we've added funding to ensure that more bus and streetcar stops are accessible. And finally, the work on ensuring resiliency continues with our 5-year fare policy and 10-year fare collection strategy, advancing service integration, opening McNichol Garage, the startup of Eglinton, ensuring that we have business continuity and emergency management responses. And on the capital side, we have additional investments to support an automated shuttle trial, continued rollout of e-buses, expanding our bike parking and bike share. So with that, I'd like to turn to the operating budget. So our operating budget submission to you today is essentially one in which the base budget has a reduction of $13 million year over year. And that is being used to fund or to reinvest in new enhanced priorities. As I mentioned, the city funding that's being maintained is at a 0% increase, or about $790 million. And the only increase you're seeing here is the COVID impact of 796 million year over year. Next slide. You can see summarized here the base budget pressures, but what they do in terms of the funding that's being recommended is that it does protect bus service, opens McNichol Garage, as Rick mentioned, addresses vehicle maintenance, investing in it now that we've made some improvements. It accommodates the inflationary and unavoidable pressures, and it ensures that we are sustainable by reversing what we had were one-time reserve draws. That's made possible by efficiencies, reductions, and other balancing actions that total almost $70 million, none of which have an impact on service. Next slide. So overall, the TTC has made great strides in improving vehicle reliability. Now, vehicle renewal has played a role in that, but now we need to maintain it. And as you can see from these charts, for each of the three modes, what it identifies is the mean distance between failures. So how many kilometers does it take before we actually have to bring the vehicle back? The purple line represents our experience in 2019, and these green bars show our experience up until the end of October 2020. And you can see that in many cases, we actually have had improvements in our reliability where we have either met or exceeded those targets. But we do need additional resources to ensure that we can maintain that. Next slide. On-time performance is showing that on the subway, our targets are being met, and we continue to see improvements in bus and our streetcar. Albeit in 2020, some of it was helped by some of the reduced traffic congestion early on, but we believe that the results in the outer part of the year demonstrates that that we are seeing success here. We know that the opening of the new McNichol bus garage will also yield some additional improvements in 2021. Next slide. So with that, the new garage is opening March 21st. We do have savings built into this budget, efficiency savings, because it will reduce some of the deadhead hours given the new location. It increases bus storage, maintains up to 250 buses. It's built on Toronto Green standards and will be operational 24/7. So when we look at service demand by mode, we did look at our revenue rides in comparison to what we saw in 2020. So in 2020, we saw by mode that bus, which is the blue line, was at about 46% of pre-COVID ridership, whereas the other two were much lower at about 26 and 28 respectively. And so what we have done is taken that information, extrapolated that out based on some key factors to determine where it ends. And what you see here is our projection for that demand for revenue rides to the end of 2021. Next slide. So for 2021, what we're showing you here, based on the experiences at the time that this report was written and the budgets were finalized, that the experience that we're having in Q4 of 2020, which is roughly around 30 to 32%, is being budgeted on an average for Q1 at the same amount, so that extends into the first quarter. And we see incremental increases at 37% in Q2, 43% in Q3, and 49% of 2020 budget by the end of the year. It is a slow and gradual recovery. It is dependent on vaccine availability as a prerequisite and economic recovery. Slide 26 then shows you by rides incrementally what we are anticipating. So much like what we had seen in stage 2 and the gray lockdown is what we're seeing for Q1. We expect in Q2 that the increase will be more in the infrequent and occasional riders and something more along the lines of stage 3. In Q3, we're expecting to see a partial return back to work and to school. And in Q4, a further increase of non-essential trips. That is our current estimate at the time that this was written. And of course, we will continue to be monitoring this. So in the end of the day, we expect that the forecast here is one that is potentially conservative and hope over the course of the year we'll continue to provide that information. Next slide. So on that basis and on the service plan that was before you at the board last week, the service hours that are built into this budget are ones that continue to match service to demand. And you will see to your left are the service hour projections from 2020 versus the 21 plan. And the change is in the groups of the to the right, which accounts for the service efficiencies and calendar adjustments, given last year was a leap year. The demand responsive service plan changes that were reported to you last week for the total number of change. So the key numbers here to identify then on the last column would be that we are going down 303,000 service hours. We have an adjustment to our supplemental bus service. And so in total, there's 364,000 fewer service hours overall. But the key point to note is that, in fact, you can see from the demand responsive service change that bus is actually going up due to the reallocation. Next slide. So when you look at that from a weekly service hours by mode, you can see here in these charts that to the left, if you take the top one, bus service hours, that bus is expected to return to pre-COVID service levels, but of course with optimization to address the greatest amount of needs. The 20 budget is the dotted line. The actuals that we've seen through 2020 is the green line, and the blue line actually lays out the path for 2021. For streetcars and our subway service hours, what you can see is a much flatter trend with a slight lift at the back, and that's in anticipation of a greater increase at the last quarter, and it gives the TTC the agility to respond. Next slide. This chart outlines in summary form the efficiencies, reductions, and balancing actions that we've taken to help offset the base budget. So there's almost $54 million in savings that do not impact service. They include looking at our base budget and taking various actions to reduce our base expenditures of a total of almost $44 million. We continue to implement the recommendations of the Auditor General in our procurement area for another net savings of $700,000. And then we have a series of efficiency measures that include, but have no impact on service, the 4 that are identified on this slide, as well as others, looking at contract efficiencies where we're able to actually save money from the way we procure, looking at how we manage our clerical staff in our divisions, and our continued management of our overtime, bringing another $9.5 million. The final action that's identified on this slide is the use of the anticipated proceeds from the settlement with Metrolinx that will be used to fully fund the actual closure and construction costs on the Eglinton and Finch West routes. Next slide. So when we look at managing our overtime, which has been a key focus for us this year in and over above our cost containment strategy, we looked at some strategies to do that, including maximizing the use of regular time resources and leveraging schedule adjustments. As a result, we saw approximately a 50% decline in operating overtime between February and September of 2020. And of course, additional reductions are coming forward in 2021 in this budget. Next slide. So the $13 million decrease that was identified in the base budget is being used and recommended for these service priorities, some of which contribute directly to our service objectives and outcomes, and the bottom 3 which support shared objectives with City Council in particular. So I won't go through them all. I think that they're here for you, but just to say that the first 2 were before you at the last board meeting. The next 2, which are identified as necessary, are those to help maintain that performance and invest in vehicle maintenance and safety. And then finally, the last 3 are those in which we are ensuring that we have the capacity to deliver those shared objectives. Next slide. When we look out to the following 2 years, what we're seeing on the expenditure side is a potential increase of about 153 million in 2022 and an additional 59 million in 2023. So some of the key drivers here is the opening of the Eglinton and Finch West LRTs over the 2-year period, reminding the commissioners that it's both the operating costs and the maintenance costs for which the City of Toronto is responsible. A gradual restoration of our 2020 service levels over the 2 years, and of course, the annual kind of escalation that we see in our unavoidable costs. Finally, I want to remind all that this does not include any cost of living adjustment, as 2021 is a collective bargaining year. So as we look, next slide, as we look to our revenue forecast in particular, what we're seeing is a gradual increase over the 2-year period. We're anticipating more of a return to pre-pandemic routines in 2022 on the expectation that vaccination will happen by the end of 2021. And of course, some of the other key factors like employment, how people work, how people travel, will also impact what we see over 22 and 23, with an average of about 70% over 22 and about an average of 90% of ridership returning by 2023. In any event, that recovery will be dependent on the pace of economic recovery, and there will be a lingering ridership impact into 2023. Next slide. So when you combine the impacts that I've just gone through, what we're potentially seeing, which are directional, if I may clarify and confirm, that by 2022, it could be a combined impact of about 540 million, and for 2023, another almost 195 million. We continue to monitor and will through 2021. Modeling continues as we get better information, and we will continue to report out on where we see these trajectories going. Now I'd like to turn your attention over to capital. So as you know, we have about now 19.4 billion in capital assets that are used to help support the delivery of our services, and our capital investment plan and our 10-year capital plan are the vehicles, the mechanisms in which we ensure that we are meeting our needs. Next slide. So in 2019, we introduced our first capital investment plan, and we did that because we believe that it provides many benefits, including awareness, education, better understanding of what our required capital needs are, and it does that over a 15-year period. It allows us to increase our focus on what those projects are, how much of it is state of good repair, projects that improve capacity, support growth. It clearly distinguishes between what is funded and unfunded, and the value of investing and the risks of failing to invest. And finally, it provides us a multi-year planning tool, which has helped us again form the basis for 2021. So with the benefits, we've seen the results already. As you may know, or to remind the board, that in 2020, we saw through the new Toronto-Ontario Transit Partnership Agreement, the recognition for the need for critical unfunded subway state of good repair needs. We had all 3 orders of government deem the Bloor-Yonge Capacity Improvements Project as a priority project with tri-party funding commitment to equally share in that cost. City Council approved the tax levy increase to raise 4.7 billion in the additional city funding, city building funds dedicated to TTC's capital needs. And with that, we obtained board approval for fleet procurement strategy. We began the planning and early works for all these major projects. And with the funding for critical state of good repair, we're able to accelerate critical asbestos removal, as well as other subway track and easier access projects because of low ridership. Next slide. So it's just as a reminder of the procurement strategy that was before you, and that this capital plan now aligns with to ensure that we can actually execute on it. Next slide. Some of the early works has resulted in the Bloor-Young Capacity Project now having a solid plan because of that funding being in place. We are using the city share, the 500 million, to begin that work and looking at executing on that. Next slide. So for 2021, we took a three-step approach. The first step was really to take our existing approved capital plan, update it, look at our spending capacity, how much we had spent, what needed to be carried forward, and ensuring that we were aligning our cash flows with our project timelines. Next. We then asked everyone to identify any critical unmet needs that should be funded, anything that required funding for anything in flight or anything that was emergent. And we created an investment panel of chief executives here at the TTC to review and confirm what priorities were possible. And through that, made recommendations, of which some were added to the 10-year capital plan that's before you, and others that couldn't be were added to the capital investment plan, which updated that for you. So as a result of those actions, what we were able to do is recalibrate the 10-year capital plan's project estimates. We reviewed all the requirements based on stage gating. We revisited assumptions, scope, and timing to confirm what were our capital priorities and requirements, and that resulted actually in pushing some key projects out in timelines. And then we identified and confirmed any emerging capital priorities to be funded. As a result of all that work, what we created was essentially about $787 million of what I call funding room. We had additional development charge funding of $324 million, and together that enabled us to fund $1.11 billion in unfunded priorities, of which, as I noted before, 95% went to state of good repair. Next slide. So our updated capital investment plan for 2021 is $37.8 billion, and you can see to the left by mode how that can be attributed, and then by category to the right by project type, with most of it, of course, being state of good repair. Next slide. So when we compare last year's plan that was before you, you can see here on the chart on the slide what the profiling of the 15-year program looked like. In total was about $36 billion. With the work that we did this year, what the new profile looks like is what you see before you. Much more even based in the front, and based on the timing of various projects, we moved them to where we felt that they were most required, including any project dependencies. As a result, what you would have seen in the first 5 years last year was about $7.6 billion, and what you're seeing in the first 5 years now is $2.8 billion that's unfunded. Next slide. So our 10-year capital plan, what are the key highlights as a result of this work? Well, it increases the steady state funding for essential safety and state of good repair capital works. We began that work last year to make sure that we could have steady state for key areas, and we were able to increase that capacity with the $1.1 billion. It ensures that we have funding to meet our legislative requirements and timelines, aligns with our fleet procurement plan, continues business modernization, maintains funding so we can complete ATC Line 1, and adds new funding to our 10th year for ATC Line 2. The timing of Line 1 and Line 2 capacity enhancement Bloor-Young have also been reflected in here. And as mentioned earlier, it adds some money for COVID-19 projects. Next slide. So when you look at the profile of spending over the 10-year period, this is the line that you would have seen in 2020. In 2021, we now see that more of it is in the front, much of it reflective of the vehicle procurement strategy, where much of the funding that was sitting throughout the 10-year period that was closer to the back end has now been brought forward as a result of that plan. Next slide. So the first profile there is of the last year's infrastructure projects. Much of the at the back end, and for 2021, with the revisiting of that, we now see it in the front end to line up with actual needs and timing. When it comes to our vehicle projects, in 2020, the orange line would have shown you, again, much more in the middle of the plan. And now for 2021, the red line shows that it's been accelerated. Next slide. So the major programs are outlined here for you, and it shows you how the almost $12 billion 10-year capital plan is allocated, with much of it going to our buildings and structures at 21% and to our capacity improvement projects at $4 billion or 34%. Next slide. So how is this capital program funded? 67% of it comes from the City of Toronto through recoverable debt or the City Building Fund at $6.6 billion, and another $544 million in regular debt. Development charge eligibility of $564 million, and others including our internal depreciation. But 12% comes from provincial funding through our provincial gas tax and the provincial commitment of $500 million for our Bloor-Young, the residual funding for our 204 LRVs, and then on the federal side, there's 21 or $2.4 billion, again with federal gas tax making up most of it, and the commitment to funding of $500 million for Bloor-Young. Next slide. When we look at the 10-year plan that's before you, what you will see from this slide is the funding, which is the dotted line of the state of good repair monies that make up this 10-year capital plan. When you then look at what is not funded, what you'll see in the orange line is the accumulated backlog, excluding our vehicles, procurements, and overhauls, which takes us essentially to about almost 18% by 2030. When you then add our vehicles to that, the total backlog is now at about rising at 32.6% by 2030. So in total, we could see that much of this, about half of it or just over half of it, is attributable to our vehicle needs. Next slide. So when you look at what's being recommended today, the 10-year capital plan is demonstrated here over the 10-year period of $12 billion. And over the 10-year period, the portion of the capital investment plan that's not funded is $10.3 billion. When you then extend the funding that is available to us, that's known, that gives us an additional $2.6 billion. And incrementally, we have additional funding requirements in the outer 5 years. And overall, it means that $23 billion over the 15 years still remains unfunded. The next slide highlights for you what some of those key items are in the 10-year period. We have about $182 million in residual health and safety projects that still need to be funded. But as you can see from the next two segments, the peach section, which is about $3.5 billion, is attributable to those fleet purchases that we are still requiring funding for. Secondly, there's about $1.9 billion on overhaul programs to ensure that beyond 2023, we have funding in place to continue a steady state life cycle replacement. Service planning requirements that have been identified for the future to help us become innovative is another $386 million. And there are some key building structures for which we have dependencies. Should we get the fleet procurements funding approved at any point above, we will also need to ensure that we have capacity at Hillcrest, at our Hillcrest facility. As mentioned earlier, there is a new facility that may be required in time for Yonge North construction currently anticipated for 2030. And finally, there's residual state of good repair, service improvement, and growth projects that bring the total combined amount to $25 billion. So next steps. So here we are today, considering the 10-year capital plan and the operating budget. We've been through a series of meetings. After the board meetings today and your approval, we'll be moving this budget forward to the city. There will be a public launch scheduled for January 14th. Budget committee review meetings where we will be presenting there somewhere between January 20th and 22nd, with a special executive committee meeting and special council meeting for approval. With that, I conclude this presentation. And thank you.
Thank you, Josie. I appreciate that. You know, it was an exceptional presentation, so thank you. I also want to say a special thank you to your entire finance team.
Thank you.
You did an incredible job. You know, their diligence and expertise is just amazing. I'd also like to take this opportunity, Chair, to publicly thank the provincial and the federal partners as well for providing essential emergency relief funding necessary due to the pandemic. And also would thank our transit-minded mayor as well as council for their support during these unprecedented times, as well as this board for whose guidance and leadership over the past year has been unparalleled. So thank you for that. With that, Chair, I'll turn it back to you or over to Chris on for the, that concludes our presentation and opening remarks.
Hello? What's going on? Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, Chair, we can hear you.
Okay, sorry, can you just tell me where we are at?
Chair, we're just calling the deputants now. We've just concluded the
Okay.
presentation.
All right, great, thank you.
Members, I believe we have our first deputant in the call, Tom Rakovic. Go ahead.
You've got 5 minutes. Is Tom there?
It looks like we're going to move on to our next deputant, Alan Yule. Go ahead, Alan. You have 5 minutes.
We're not hearing anybody.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes, now is perfect. Go ahead.
Madam Chair, I would like to thank the MPP for Humber Black River Creek for signing me up to speak today. If for no other reason, it gives the rest of us our full 5 minutes to speak on a subject for the first time in years. This is my 10th trip through the TTC budget process and my 11th deputation on this subject. This is not my first rodeo. Next slide, please. The budget has fares set for $325 in cash, $320 for a Presto Tap, and $156 for a monthly pass. This budget will pass, but it shouldn't. On January 10th, 2019, or sorry, next slide, on January 10th, 2019, this board was told that the TTC's existing business model is increasingly unaffordable. Next slide, please. On January of 2019, Mr. Leary told this board that there was an impending fiscal iceberg ahead. The politicians in the room and on this call basically said, thank you for your input, now go back to shoveling the coal. This board, next slide, this board includes 3 civilian board members. You, plus 1 more to be added next year, are on the board to use your business acumen to help bring the best business practices to the TTC. Next slide, please. This budget has a fare structure that nets us less money for a cash fare than a Presto Tap, almost 10 cents less per cash fare than taking a fare and using Presto for fees. Next slide, please. Again, on January 10th, 2019, this board was told that the TTC's existing budget model is increasingly unaffordable. This 2021 budget is using the same base business model as the 2011 budget. Next slide, please. On November 28th, 2017, the board approved the current time-based transfer policy. Next slide, please. As a mere coincidence, a month earlier, a deputant was able to show the TTC board the business case for time-based transfers. Next slide, please. Time-based transfers are part of best business practices for practically all transit agencies in Canada. Then and now with the 2021 budget, it is part of the role of the civilian TTC board members to bring best business practices to the TTCs that is politically controlled. Next slide, please. When this budget is passed, the monthly pass will sell for an insanely high price of $156. As you know, I am a West End boy, so from the West End perspective, I bring you the following scenario. Next slide, please. If you live in Liberty Village and work on Bay Street, if you have only need for public transport to commute to and from work, it is $25 cheaper a month to take the GO train to Bay Street than it is to take the King streetcar to Bay Street. Next slide, please. This is how bad our 2021 budget is when it comes to its fare structure. Both the King streetcar and Lakeshore West GO train run 7 days a week, but it's $25 more to take the King streetcar to Bay and King than to take the GO train to Bay and Front. Next slide, please. In my 11 deputations on this subject, I have always argued for a more equitable fare structure. I have tried to present a business case where a more equitable fare structure would lead to more actual money being raised by the TTC and a decrease in the incidence of fare evasion. Next slide, please. Unfortunately, that approach was wrong, not because the facts were incorrect. Next slide, please. But that the politicians on this board don't seem to care about increasing the total funds raised by the TTC or decreasing the number of incidents of fare evasion on the TTC. Next slide, please. You have correspondence before you of a coast-to-coast listing of Canadian transit agencies and their fare structures. The average number of trips to break even, excluding the TTC, is 32 trips versus the almost 49 on the TTC. Next slide, please. Ottawa has the second largest transit agency in Ontario. It has 33 trips to break even versus our 49. Montreal is the second, almost, ma'am. Montreal has the second largest city in Canada. It has 28 trips versus a 49. Calgary is the third largest. I could go on, but you get the picture. Next slide, please. It is standard business practice for Canadian transit agencies to price their monthly transit pass significantly lower than the 40 trips to get to work and back. Next slide, please. The Canada Supreme Court has 9 members on it and can occasionally produce dissenting opinions. You are allowed to have dissenting opinions too. Next slide, please. Dissenting opinions are important because they put an alternative interpretation of the case on the record. This can encourage and inform future discussions in the process next time, hopefully with a budget committee that we may or may not have next year. Next slide, please. I am asking the 3 civilian board members, I am talking to them and you were added to bring your business acumen to running the TTC. You swore fiduciary responsibility to the TTC, not to City Hall or to the other city councilors. You're there to do the right thing for the overall fiscal health of the operations of the TTC. I'm asking you to vote against this budget, even though we know this will pass. Next slide, please. I am asking you to do this to remind the city and its politicians that the board was told 23 months ago by the TTC's own CEO that the existing business model is increasingly unaffordable. Thank you.
Thank you. If we can, is there any questions for the deputant? Councillor Carroll.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Alan, thanks for your presentation. Once again, you've zeroed in on the problem of our monthly pass, and it is a really difficult bit of math. But I raise once again the issue that the other transit systems that you're mentioning get a significant operating infusion every year, not just a COVID year, but every year they get operating dollars to help defray those costs from their provinces, Alberta, Quebec, BC. I'm wondering, do you ever feel as if the provincial government is giving you any opportunity to make this presentation to them?
Through Madam Chair, no, the provincial government is not coming to the table, and that is a problem. But Ontario, doesn't give any more money to Ottawa to run its transit system. It's 33 trips versus 49.
Mhm.
We have to
Right.
come somewhere in the middle, and we have to get the province involved, and we have to get the city more motivated too.
And they don't provide any, there's no regular opportunity for you to speak to them on their transportation budget, for instance, is there?
Again, through the chair, no, I'm sorry, there is no opportunity for us, for the public to do that.
Yeah, yeah. So perhaps a joint event has to be pressed for. Okay, thanks. Thanks for your presentation, Alan.
If
Thank
I
you.
may
Any
add
other
to that, you have
questions?
to get people involved at the city level so that you and the city can go to the province and say, what's up, and put up some money.
Okay. Thank you. And so we'll, to the clerk, we'll move on to our next deputant.
The next deputant is Tom Rekovic. Go ahead.
Hello, did you hear me?
Yes, go ahead. You have 5 minutes.
Excellent. Good morning, TTC board members and staff. My name is Tom Rakosovic, and I'm the member of Provincial Parliament for Humber River Black Creek and a member of the official opposition. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you this morning. Having previously worked at City Hall for several years, there are a number of you on the board that I remember well, and it is nice to see you again. I'm here to briefly discuss the public health risk posed by packed buses during this pandemic. Before I do so, I want to acknowledge that overall diminished ridership has had a huge impact on your revenues. Your detailed presentations certainly attested to this. As well, provincial government assistance has been minimal, and further assistance has come with strings attached. I recognize your job is certainly not easy. You are mostly left on your own, and I know that you are working very hard with very little. I represent a Northwest Toronto community that has been one of the hardest hit by COVID-19 in the province. Many live in multi-generational households in high-rise apartments. Many, if not most, are essential workers who cannot work from home. As such, during the rush hour, many fearfully pack onto buses such as the 35 and 36 routes. Again, these routes drive through neighborhoods that have some of the highest COVID-19 transmission rates in the province. Here is some of what transit riders in my community are telling me. Samuel, a PSW at a long-term care home, said, "The discomfort of sharing a limited space with so many people during a pandemic takes a mental toll on me. Waiting and traveling in crowded conditions has increased my anxiety, stress, and overall exhaustion." Nancy and other essential workers said, "I feel claustrophobic on the daily. The entire ride, I'm eager to get off the crowded bus just so I can take a breath with calm. I'm really scared I will get COVID and pass it on to my family." Hannah, yet another essential worker, said, "I feel like I have no choice. I am forced to take the crowded buses because I have rent and bills to pay. I just started this job and I cannot afford to lose it if I am late because I am waiting for a less crowded bus." Here's what a TTC bus driver told me. "Just this week during morning rush hour, I had a bus full of people that boarded at the station. The bus was packed all the way past the white line that passengers must be standing behind. This has been an ongoing issue since the beginning of lockdown and once again with the surge in cases. The list goes on. Packed buses are a public health risk during this pandemic. I know that you know this as well because you have recently added buses to these lines despite your budget shortfall. On behalf of my community, I thank you for this, but more is needed. I've been pushing the government to provide you additional funds to temporarily add buses to packed routes, but thus far, they seem intent on letting you handle this alone. I am a member of the province's Select Committee on Emergency Management Oversight. Time and again, the Minister of Health does not seem to acknowledge the public health issues that arise from packed buses and has indicated that the command table has yet to discuss it. This is surprising and very disappointing. The province must help you in addressing this, and the provincial government has access to $12 billion of unspent pandemic funds. The City of Toronto is the capital of Ontario. I want you to know that your work and words do not go unnoticed by the province. When you pass motions that call on the province, we as MPPs all get them. For instance, I have your letter with me dated November 27th calling on the provincial government to reverse its changes to conservation authorities. I strongly agree with your letter and appreciate you sending it to us. I hope you will join my call to ask the provincial government for additional funding to help the TTC add buses to packed routes, especially in communities with high levels of COVID-19 transmission. Your voice is a powerful one. Thank you again for your time today, and I wish you and your loved ones all the best during the holidays.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Commissioner Carroll.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Tom, hi, nice to hear from you. Tom, you mentioned
nice to hear from you too.
Yeah, you mentioned the $12 billion surplus that was highlighted in the media recently. Is it your understanding that a substantial amount of that is still there and not earmarked? That they could be acting on it? I ask because we know that the premier is probably going to announce a lockdown such as we had back in March and April to start after Christmas. But if we cut service, we'll still have crowded buses. So I'm wondering, is it your understanding that some of that billion is still there and should be in play?
Well, first off, I think I think many of you remember the premier well from his time at City Hall. The second part is, to my understanding, there is some money left. I don't know the exact amount, but certainly this is something very worthy of funding. They have a health command table that should be looking at situations where COVID transmission is highly possible. Certainly, packed buses are one of them, and I think it's imperative that they help you deal with this.
Thank you. Thanks, Tom, for coming.
Other
My pleasure.
questions? I see none. Clerk will move on to our next deputation. Thank you for your
Thank you.
deputation.
Thank you.
Our next deputant is Lou Israel. Go ahead, you have 5 minutes. Lou Israel, please go ahead.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, go ahead, you have 5 minutes.
Good morning, City Councilors and TTC members. I'm speaking to you today as a low-income TTC rider, also happens to be a contract worker and who cannot justify the cost of a monthly pass. I hope I don't duplicate what previous deputies have said, but I think we need to agree on and address the question of fares being too high. Now, this has been the case for several years, and fare hikes will only serve to negatively impact people like myself. When one cannot afford fares, one of four things will happen. We will stop using the TTC, reducing revenues further, which also creates a downward spiral of ever-diminishing services, forcing us to walk to our destinations regardless of distance, weather, or condition of our bodies. We will not use the TTC and not go to that appointment or job interview or some other errand because they're simply too far and our bodies cannot take us the whole way. We will pay the increased fare and be at risk of being unable to pay other bills like rent or phone or internet or food. Or a few of us may try to get by without paying. Now, none of these situations is a net positive for the working poor. And those with important appointments to get to or job interviews who are low income and to whom a monthly pass simply doesn't make any sense. The problem I have is, well, one of the problems that I have is the TTC reaction to all this is to do arguably the worst thing that they could possibly do, install fare inspectors who are not there for our safety, but simply to intimidate and harass disproportionately the very people who need affordable public transportation the most. I have witnessed, as well as have been a victim of this kind of treatment. For example, I have tapped my card quickly on the streetcar when I saw a crew of fare inspectors in the subway making their rounds. I approached one very openly and honestly, asking them to simply confirm that I had in fact tapped my card and that I could go along my way, only to have them turn around and decide that they declared I deliberately refused to pay my fare. After an argument where they refused to consider my innocence a mistake or a faulty machine, they gave me a ticket, forcing me to fight it. After worrying about this for weeks, I had my day in court, and I should point out that courts are by their very nature unsettling and intimidating, not to mention risking a day's salary to have my say to try to recall exactly the events of what was then several months previous. Before I went into the courtroom, the lawyers told me to plead guilty and pay a lesser fine, and even though I agreed to do so, when I told the judge why, she wouldn't accept my plea because, in her own words, I mistakenly assumed the machine worked and that everything was fine. Now, in my case, I happen to be a Caucasian male, The stress I experienced and the trauma that still haunts me years afterwards is bad enough. However, I suspect if I were a different race or gender, I might be targeted more frequently and be harassed on a regular basis. I point out that even if fair inspectors were to cost the TTC nothing, their very presence is there to intimidate and cause anxiety, nothing less. We feel less safe with them around. But I would say that the absolute worst use of millions of taxpayer dollars is to hire uniformed cops to accuse and threaten those least able to fight back instead of spending those funds to lower fares. If we're going to lower fares, we need to stop spending on useless, unproductive, and negative aspects of the TTC. Thank you.
Do I see any questions for the deputant? I don't think I do. Thank you very much for your deputation, and to the clerk, we'll move on.
Our next deputant is Dan Bingham. Please go ahead. You have 5 minutes.
Do I hang up?
Dan Bingham, please go ahead.
Yeah.
Dan
Good morning.
Bingham.
You can all hear me now.
Yes, please go ahead. You have 5 minutes.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much for this opportunity to speak to you people. First of all, I want to say thank you for all your hard work. I'm on a member of several different boards, so I know the work that you guys do put in, and thank you very much. Now, that said, you know, we need that the federal government, I would say the federal government, but also the provincial government need to put money into constant, reliable funding for the TTC and for transit. I am a peer support worker. I work out of St. Stephen's. I'm part of a group called Member Advocacy Committee, and we advocate on behalf of people that are, you know, less fortunate than other people. And 8 years ago, I almost committed suicide. I mean, I did try to commit suicide. I wasn't successful. You know, in my recovery, the first thing I got when I, on the start of every month was my Metro Pass, and it got me to all the different medical appointments. And it eventually got me to so that I could take retraining and actually search for employment. I did get employed. I am now self-employed. I have my own business, and I'm on the board of directors for the Village by the Grange. All of that was put in place because I had the opportunity to get to different appointments. So we need to have funding so that people that are on low income can have this ability to do this. Now let's get it straight that business and government created transit in the beginning in order to get people to go to the factory so that the businesses could operate. They didn't do it so that people could go to the beach, right? You know, and I feel that, you know, they talk about after the recovery from COVID, right, that they're going to spend money to stimulate the economy. Well, the best way to stimulate the economy is to be able to get people moving again, right? You know, I have a novel idea, and it's going to make everybody scared. Why don't we make transit free for 1 month, and then we see the increase in productivity, the general economy. You know, like I'm not even an expert on these things, but I'm quite sure it would be obvious. Now, you know, so that's my little bit of a rant. Now, another thing is what we do is we help people that are in people. I'm sorry, I got a little bit nervous, and it's hard for me to put this across, but we advocate on harm reduction, right? So we realize that there are people that are using on the TTC, and what we would project is putting up a free accessible naloxone kit It could be in a little plastic bubble or something like that, so that TTC drivers and all that don't have to do this, right? Just the same way as if you wanted to press an alarm bell for an emergency, right? You could actually get this thing, and if somebody wanted to try to help somebody that was going through an overdose, right, it would be presented for them. I think that it'd be great for the TTC to show that they care about people. It would help raise the awareness of, you know, the fact that people are doing drugs and they need help to survive, right, for one more day. I'm sorry I'm not as articulate as some of the past deputants, but I really feel passionate about this. And like I said, you guys have done a really good job, and thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you very much. I don't see any questions for you unless I'm missing somebody. But thank you very much for your deputation. We'll move on to our next deputant.
Thank you.
Our next deputant is Kathisa Kumaran Navaratnam. Please unmute yourself and go ahead. You have 5 minutes.
Good morning, members of the TTC board. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Kathisa Kumaran Navaratnam. I am an active community member from the Melbourne neighborhood in Ward 25, represented by Councillor Jennifer McKelvey. Thank you for this opportunity to speak on the TTC's 2021 operating budget. Freezing the fare for 2021 is a responsible thing to do, and I would like to thank the TTC for this sensible decision. Questionably, it shouldn't take a pandemic to freeze the fares. The bitter truth is that freezing the fare does not make transit affordable at all. These days, transit riders are paying an invisible fare, in addition to the TTC fare, for keeping themselves and others safe from the virus. Be it a mask, sanitizer, or the daily extra laundry, all of this amount to a significant hardship for riders. We must not forget that TTC fares are one of the most expensive ones in North America. Compared to the rate of inflation, TTC fares have exponentially increased over the past decade, making it unaffordable for many riders, including myself. The city has been through a fare crisis for more than a decade, and more must be done to make transit affordable and accessible. And the fare freeze is never enough. If the pandemic has enlightened you to increase service on busy routes, by the same token, geographically scattered suburbs like Scarborough deserve a transfer window that is more than 2 hours, particularly during this pandemic where wait times for grocery shopping are longer and some bus routes may not have frequent service. Transit riders anywhere in the city should be able to access a frequent, reliable, and efficient transit system. The proposed budget prioritizes service on high-demand routes by adding more bus service. While it is applaudable, an equitable transit system should ensure that regardless of where you live, you deserve a dignified transit experience, a transit that is on time, fast, and not overcrowded. The proposed budget does little to solve the problem of the pre-pandemic era that persists to date. Calling the fare freeze a responsible pandemic response would be a misrepresentation. Fares in the city have skyrocketed over the past decade. I urge the TTC board to do the following as a pandemic response. Increase the frequency of bus service in inner suburbs so that riders don't need to wait in the cold, and ensure that there is no overcrowding. Thank you very much for listening to me, and I wish you a very happy new year.
Thank you very much. Any questions? I can't really see everybody in one fell swoop here, so I'm hoping there's not. So thank you very much. We're going to move on to our next deputation.
Our next speaker is Sheila Pizy Allen. Please unmute yourself and go ahead. You have 5 minutes.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. Hi, good morning. Thanks for the chance to address the budget. I'm speaking on behalf of TTC Riders, a membership organization of transit users, and I just wanted to make a few points about fares, service levels, and face masks. And on fares, we're certainly glad to see that fares are frozen in 2021. It's only the second time fares have been frozen in the last 10 years. Nobody wants to see essential workers and transit users pay for the pandemic and the lower ridership we've seen. And we know that lower income people are using transit more during the pandemic because since January of last year, or of 2020, the Fare Pass ridership declined by 37% and non-Fare Pass ridership declined by 61%. And yet the Fare Pass is not fully funded next year. And we can't go back to normal when normal means increasing the fare every year. We really need a whole new funding model for transit where higher levels of government and the City of Toronto subsidizes the TTC more, not riders. And like other people have mentioned, more affordable transit is going to help more people return to taking transit. And on service, again, it's great that service is going to return slowly to normal levels and that express service will be reintroduced. But we're really concerned that the TTC's plan is to move the goalposts on crowding throughout the year. The budget plans to move the maximum capacity threshold of 25 people per bus and increase it to 35 people per bus by year end. So this is really a plan to move the goalposts, not to add more service. And we've heard from so many speakers about what the impact is of crowding on buses. And it's been said before at past meetings, but the TTC is finding efficiencies, so-called efficiencies, by reducing service on bustling corridors, and that they should not be an excuse to reduce service hours. There's 50,000 service hours being saved along Eglinton East, but prioritizing transit has to go hand in hand with more service, not cuts. The 303,000 fewer service hours planned for next year, those should be reinvested in the system. And finally, on masks, based on the anecdotes we're hearing from riders, my own experience on public transit, there are fewer people wearing face masks on the TTC, more people wearing them improperly. And when people are on a packed bus, they're rightly worried and afraid about their safety. So we're happy that the TTC distributed 1 million masks and that there have been staff deployed around the bus network. But we want to know, what is the strategy to get everyone wearing masks, because what's been happening so far is not working. And right now your plan for next year is to slowly let more and more people back onto buses, and yet fewer and fewer people are wearing masks. So, riders have been raising this, but right now, there's fare inspectors who are educating people about the fare. Why aren't there staff educating people about the need to wear masks and hand out more masks? This is the #1 concern we're hearing about from riders, and we don't see a plan to address it. So, in conclusion, we really need a whole new funding model for transit. We've seen today that ridership might take years to recover, so we need that permanent provincial and federal funding support. But in the meantime, we need a bold plan from this board to make transit truly affordable and to meet riders' needs for safety and reliability. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Okay, we're going to move on to our next deputant. Thank you very much for your deputation.
Our next deputant is Johnny Dibb. Please go ahead.
Oh, hi, I just got asked to unmute, but I'm not Johnny.
Hi, my name is Johnny Deep. I'm speaking on behalf of the York Southwestern Tenant Union. We are a grassroots organization representing tenants in the area of York Southwestern. We represent individual tenants as well as tenant associations where tenants are organized at the building level. What we're hearing, I'm going to try and relay what we're hearing from our membership. And it's the following. We run this city. We kept showing up to work, and we're still going to work. And one of the ways we get to work is on the bus. And we feel a bit disrespected in the way the city and the TTC dealt with the crowding levels that they allow on buses. We are serviced by major bus routes, the 35 Jane, the 52 Lawrence, the 41 Keel, and the St. Clair streetcar. one of the concerns that we have is that there's this pretense in the TTC that on Saturdays and Sundays, that it's okay to run fewer buses on the weekend. This is completely counter to the actual experience of riders in Northwest Toronto. We use the bus every day of the week, including to go to work. A big portion of bus ridership on the weekend, on Saturdays and Sundays, is people going to work or coming back from work. So to pretend that we're all working a 9-to-5 job is very offensive to us, especially those of us who work shift work. And we feel that, we kept showing up during the pandemic to stock the shelves and make the pizza sauces and the pizza doughs and feed people in the city. And the way we get treated is to pretend that we don't need to go to work on Saturday. This is just simply not true. So we need to look at scheduling on bus routes, keeping that in mind. There's a hoax right now going on with the way the schedule is written. The other concern that we have and that we're hearing from the other thing I wanted to highlight that I heard from our membership is that households that own a car, members of our tenant union who own a car in the household, are also very concerned about bus service levels. And this is not because, they're just thinking selflessly. It's because it's very common in Toronto for households who own a car to also have a member of the household use the TTC on a regular basis. This is very common in Toronto. And for those commissioners listening who are also members of City Council, this is something that you should keep in mind. The reason why in a city like Toronto where so many people own cars, we also have a very high ridership on our transit system is because it's the same families that use both. And so when you're making budgetary decisions at the city level, you should keep that in mind and fund the TTC properly. To reflect the fact that, the taxpayers are the bus riders. And the last thing I want to say is that I understand that there are fiscal challenges facing the TTC, but again, members of the commission are also, some members of the commission are also members of City Hall. And I feel like emergency measures should be taken to address these concerns that we have. And it's not enough to say, oh, well, there isn't enough money, so we're going to have a beautiful plan that looks good on paper, but not execute it. Our capital budget is largely unfunded. Our operational budget is woefully, inadequate. And it's not good enough to keep saying, well, yeah, okay, there's not enough money. Can you talk to the province? Can you talk to the federal government? We are talking to the province. We did sign on to letters to the federal government, as a tenant union, and we feel that we were part of the solution in getting that emergency money from the federal government because we did put that pressure. So at the city level, there needs to be some emergency measures to create money and spend on this issue. We have reserves. I believe that we have ways to go around and spend through loans or deficits or something. It's not my area of expertise, but it's not good enough for us to have to see 70 people waiting on Jane and Wilson on a Saturday in the middle of the day waiting for the bus. Regularly, more than 25 people waiting in the morning on Jane and Lawrence on weekends.
Okay, your time's up. Do you have a concluding statement?
I just want those members of the commission who are also on City Hall to take that message and come up with the money.
Thank you. So I see no questions, so we'll move to our next deputant. Thank you very much for your deputation.
Our next deputant is ZC Powers. Go ahead.
Hi there. My name is ZC. I just want to thank everybody for their time today, both the board members and all the deputants. I'm a lifelong Toronto resident. I currently live in Chinatown, but I have a lot of experience throughout my life on the 36, the 52, and the 71 specifically, but lots of other routes. And the reason I wanted to speak today is that specifically that fares need to be kept low, and as many other deputies have said, to even be reduced. At the same time, it's also critical that services increase, not just to encourage ridership, but also to protect the health of all the riders and staff who, as we know, are all essential workers right now. The only reason anybody is taking a TTC is to either get to work or to get to a medical appointment or to get their groceries. And I also, this kind of leads into another thing that has been brought up already today, but the money spent on fare enforcement really needs to be moved towards increased mask distribution and education. Because right now it feels offensive to be on the TTC knowing that it's your only option, and for so many people to know that they are essential, their work they're doing is needed, and to have people there whose only job is to check and make sure you've paid as opposed to keeping people safe. And that's really all I have to say about that.
Very much. I don't see any questions. So we have one more deputation, and this deputation is on the capital investment plan, the 15-year capital, and capital budget. So to the clerk, if you could secure our last speaker.
Our next deputant is Hayden Poon. Go ahead. You have 5 minutes.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, thanks. Hi, the TTC board members. I'm here to detail on the capital budget. So first of all, it's good to see that a majority of the capital budget is going to the state of good repairs.
Audio's just gone out a little bit. Your voice has just started to fade in the last sentence.
Okay, can you hear me now?
That's good.
Okay, so yep, I was saying that it's very good to see that the majority of the capital budget is going to the state of good repairs. Like it's very important that we fund the state of good repairs so that like all the subways and buses and streetcar get maintained at the quality that they should be. There are many subway closures on them every single day at night and weekend, but there are a lot of emergency that affect the TTC service. Like for example, I can expect a delay anywhere from 0 minutes to 15 minutes on a trip that's supposed to take less than 30 minutes. This means every day we'll look at the time and count down on how many minutes until my bus will leave and when my train will arrive. If I miss that bus, I may take anywhere from 20 minutes to 45 minutes waiting at a bus terminal. Missing a bus is completely normal for me. In fact, I sometimes always change route or ask my mom to pick me up or even just sitting on the bus terminal for 45 minutes doing nothing. Reliability is way more important than a slower but predictable trip because we plan according to the schedule. All the projects proposed in the capital budget are very important. The automatic train control system, platform doors, Boryang capacity improvement, like the ATC and Boryang capacity improvement have reduced delays and subway bunching on a closed system where there shouldn't be bunching technically on a system that is closed that only with subways. So the ATC the capacity improvement should technically improve reliability. The TTC also have a lot of track level emergencies where someone voluntarily or involuntarily enter the track area. In fact, one of my friends even witnessed one of those incidents. So I think that was definitely very important to implement the platform doors on the subway platform. Secondly, so on the budget, I also mentioned the SRT, Scarborough Rapid Transit, which is the overall funding is only budget to 2026. I know that is based on the fact that the Scarborough subway is supposed to open in 2027, but now it's more like 2030 or very optimistically 2030 or later. So it's have a problem on where we may need buses for the SRT in the years later to come, and the TTC doesn't even have enough buses, and now it's allocating up if it need to allocate a bunch of buses to surface line free all day, even at rush hours. Then if there are another emergency on the system, which is quite frequently there will be, and then no way can the TTC find more buses that impacts, unless it impacts service on other bus routes. In the last 9 months during COVID also showed that TTC doesn't have enough buses, and it's just a very crowding, and then there's no social distance from riders. And the TTC clearly don't have enough buses. I also want to highlight that there's a lot of unfunded capital projects in the capital budgets. Like there's like basically a huge gap between what is budgeted and what's funded, and that means we need like significant provincial and federal funding for it. So therefore, I urge you, the city councilor and the city, to push for more federal funding and provincial funding to provide more permanent funding to capital projects. By permanent, I mean like there should be a constant stream of funding coming from the federal and provincial government to fund our capital projects, especially for state of good repairs, and that instead of like the city keeps standing project in, that there should be a dedicated stream of funding just coming in for those specific capital projects. And that's all for my deputation.
Thank you very much for your deputation. No questions, so we're going to move on. Thank you to all the deputants for your presentations today. And we're going to bring it back into committee or back into the board and start with item 1, which is 2021 TTC and Wheel-Trans operating budget. And we have, I believe, some people to ask questions. So I'm going to start with Joanne, or sorry, not Joanne, the vice chair. She has a question on the budget.
Thank you, Chair. I actually, it's not so much a question as a comment. Is that allowed at this point?
I think if you can hold off, we'll just do questions first, Vice Chair, and then we'll shift to comments, and you can be up first. So any questions? Do I see any questions, or I'm not getting any indication. So oh, I see a couple. Okay, so Commissioner McKelvey, you've got 5 minutes for questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the recs are very well written. It was easy to understand the funding and where it's coming from. The only one I wasn't quite following, and I was hoping you could just elaborate on a little bit, was recommendation 3 about the LRT disruption service. Could you just kind of outline what that is that you're talking about there?
Okay, so through the chair, essentially, what we're proposing this year is to utilize the anticipated proceeds from the Metrolinx settlement that hasn't been quite finalized, but we expect to be finalized in 2021, to offset the costs that would have previously been recovered by Metrolinx. So these are the LRT disruption costs where we have to either have closures or we have augmented service. And so that totals for Eglinton and Finch 15.8 million. So so that it's not a direct impact, it's time limited, we would use the proceeds to offset that cost.
Okay, and if everything, are these planned closures or these are unexpected closures? So if the funding's not used, does it just keep rolling towards that use in the future?
Through the chair, I believe it's planned, and so to the extent that that it doesn't happen, then of course that would roll into the future. But this is our best information of what we understand will happen in 2021.
Okay, and then the letter funding agreement from Minister Mulroney. It does not, previous discussions had talked about some of the requirements that TTC would have to have around microtransit, et cetera. I didn't see that in this letter. Are those requirements there, or what is the status of that discussion?
So I'll begin, but while the actual letter didn't indicate those requirements, those policy requirements still continue. This letter was more about the allocation, the funding allocation itself, to give us a sense of the value of the dollars that could be coming to us. And so, okay.
So that's an ongoing discussion then, to meet that requirement?
Yes, that's correct. Okay. And this budget helps, so and our work helps support that, meeting those requirements.
Okay, great. And I do see the funding for the automated transit shuttle. So that's great, because I think that's a step in the right direction around that. And then my last question on operating is, do you feel that you're planning for worst case ridership? And the letter, again, with Mulrooney, it discusses that the funding is hard until March 2021. And then there's the potential for that balance. And do you see any risk on the balance of that funding?
So through the chair, so two things. I guess our ridership forecast is realistic. Of course, the announcement that's potentially coming today might adjust the first quarter slightly as well, depending on the extension of whatever lockdown happens into January. But we believe that that allocation has been set aside for the TTC, and we're very hopeful that we can use it beyond March 31st, but continue to work with the city staff and provincial staff to be able to fully leverage that funding that's in the letter.
Okay, so right now, though, the plan includes that money being delivered.
That's our expectation.
Okay, thank you, and thank you for your good work on this.
Thank you. And Commissioner Lalonde is next.
Thank you, Chair. I had two questions. The first was if you could provide a little bit more detail on what's included in the amount for cybersecurity in the 21 operating budget.
If you could just give me a moment. Essentially, through the chair, the funding for cybersecurity in the operating budget is a prorated amount to actually begin to procure managed services that we will be requiring. We are working with the city to actually leverage the contracts that they have and to ensure that we're in alignment, but it's essentially to start with the managed services.
Okay, thank you. My other question was with respect to capacity that we're running next year, am I right in assuming that we are effectively running full capacity on buses and reduced capacity relative to 2020 budget levels on streetcar and subway? And if that's correct, I guess the question is there any opportunity to pay for increased capacity on buses without acquiring more buses at this point?
So I'll turn this over to Mark or Kathleen, who may want to take this forward. Just as a reminder, this is part of our service plan discussion the other day, but essentially we are at capacity on buses where we need it most and rebalancing with routes. And that's coming from a slightly lower than budgeted capacity in 2020 on streetcar and subway, but at current levels.
Okay, thank you. That's what I thought. No other questions, Chair.
Okay, and do we need Kathleen or Mark to weigh in, or is it covered?
I think it's covered by the Chief Financial Officer.
Okay, great, thank you. Next questioner is Commissioner Lai. You're up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, staff, for a very good presentation. Actually, I've got some of my answers during the presentation. I just have a couple of questions. As a new commissioner, I see that the budget makes reference to the proceeds from a settlement of Metrolinx. Can you fill me on just quickly on that one? What is it all about?
I'm going to ask Kathleen to provide an overview, please.
Yes, through you, Madam Chair. The TTC has had a number of outstanding issues, particularly with respect to our Presto contract, which we signed in 2012. And because they had those outstanding issues, Metrolinx and the TTC had decided to invoke the arbitration clauses in that agreement. And the two CEOs decided that arbitration doesn't always end up in the best results for everybody, and it can be a costly process. And so they assigned myself and the Metrolinx CFO to develop a settlement agreement. And the board considered the draft terms in camera in, I'm sorry, I'm forgetting the date, was it our September board meeting? when they gave staff the authority to continue to negotiate with Metrolinx and to solve more than just the Presto issues, but some of the outstanding issues around what we call bus augmentation. And so that was all laid out in that confidential report, which we should make sure I'll give you access to that. Of course, you should have all that confidential information. And that's what this is referring to. We're working closely with Metrolinx to bring the final settlement forward to the board, probably to the April meeting of the TTC board. And there'll be a chance to fully approve it at that time. Until then, the terms are confidential.
Okay, thank you. It's really helpful. And I suppose that the legal budget has been increased on reflect on the use that we might need to have some legals on our legal matters, litigation outstanding, I suppose.
I think I'll have to ask Josie to answer that question. I know that, as I said, this settlement is meant to save the high legal costs that would be associated with an arbitration.
Okay, I'm good on that one. I just have a couple of more questions. So one of the areas that we are protecting savings of the budget is from the fuel. So we have about $30 million on that one. So does TTC hedge the fuel cost? So what percentage of our fuel cost that is being hedged?
So through the chair, we try to maintain about a 50% hedging against regular price indexing, and so that we can manage the volatility of the two together. So 50% is being hedged in this budget.
Okay, one final question is that I think it's a hard question. I see that the CEO budget is up over 10%. Is there any reason for that?
Yes, through the chair, I can explain that. Essentially, it's a series of adjustments. In the CEO budget is our legal department, which has that increase in funding for legal services that was before the board for the fitness for duty and other arbitration costs. And as well, we're recommending an increase in funding as a new item for business continuity emergency management. So that's in there for the requested 800,000. So that's really taking that up by the 13%. And then we're also transferring some functions out into our people group.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. Madam Chair, those are my questions.
Sorry, my mic was off. Thank you, and we'll move now to Commissioner Carroll.
Thanks, Madam Chair. And I want to share the comments of other commissioners. The report itself is this year written in a very transparent and explanatory text, which I appreciated. But I'll use the presentation for some of my questions. Commissioner McKelvey asked the questions about the intergovernmental funding, and that spelled it out for me a little bit better. So we're really left not knowing about that 185 million. I wondered if there was any update necessary, or just is there an intergovernmental conversation necessary from the fact that what we're likely to hear, or may have already heard while we were at this meeting, that we're going to go into another more extreme lockdown. Having made conservative estimates here about the change from Q1 to Q4 in 2021, should we be adjusting that that outstanding number upwards, or do we think we made a conservative enough estimate to begin with?
So through the chair, I was expecting this question. We've rewritten this thing a few times, given that it's so fluid. But essentially, what we're assuming coming into January is about 30% ridership. And so with the announcement of the lockdown, we could see going into at least the first few weeks of January where it could be below that. So we'll be monitoring that closely. But at this point, we're not recommending that we adjust we could see it change as the year goes on. But I think an early warning signal would be in the first quarter to best understand where we are.
Okay. And then if I can turn to the deputations, if they don't mind my simplifying, it comes down to the big challenges in operating, which is our fare strategy and crowding. And so to start with, the issue of fares was raised by TTC riders and many of the individual deputants. Is the 5-year fare strategy still on the same schedule? Should we be deliberating over that this year, and can it be done with a COVID overlay so that we don't get behind on it? Because people want some certainty on where we're going with that.
Kathleen, would you handle that one if you wouldn't mind? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I'm thinking also that there is new timing that's needed for our fare policy work. And as we speak, Angela Gibson and I are texting back and forth to sort of ask ourselves what we can hurry up with. We have finished, we've done a considerable amount of stakeholder consultation, and I'm waiting to hear that reflected back. And we're going out with a public survey first thing in the new year. And so Angela and I will be taking these comments back and asking ourselves how we can accelerate our work.
Oh, okay. So when you say new timing, acceleration as opposed to pushing it back, because that pressure on the monthly fare pass, we're going to look at changing work patterns. So
it's February
looking
4th.
at some new instrument might even be necessary here. That's what I mean when I say COVID overlay.
And a timeline.
Is that possible? Sorry, I think I hear the CEO talking over me.
Just we can hear the board table. We can hear Rick Leary speaking. So it's okay. Back to
I don't
you.
know if Kathleen was able to hear that. Do you need me to repose it, or you're good?
No, I think I'm good. Honestly, I'm still processing what we heard, and I wonder if Angela wants to just weigh in quickly about what she's thinking about the COVID overlay, if she's there. There she is.
Through the chair. So yes, we are taking into consideration what we're hearing from the public, even in our preliminary conversations with many stakeholders. So we've been engaging with advocacy groups as recent as last week, and we're hearing some of the feedback and the impact of COVID with respect to fares. And so that is going to be incorporated into our work. Where, as Kathleen mentioned, we're not anticipating drawing out the process, but we are looking to provide this board with early learnings from what we're hearing from the public and from our advocacy groups. So we do have a report coming to the board with an update in February. And so I'm hoping that we'll be able to provide you with what we've heard so far from advocacy groups and the public with respect to even the impact of COVID on fares and particularly even with the Fare Pass program that we have.
Yeah. Madam Chair, I don't know if I have any more time. I just had
you can ask one last question.
Okay. We hear about the crowding standard. Let me see if I can load this all into one. We hear about the crowding standards, and you've put in there 25 escalating to 35 on buses, but that's the average. And so we're hearing about health and safety daily. They're approaching particularly the councillor commissioners and I probably the citizens where they're available. I'm wondering if to get through the first half of this year, is that crowding standard, that's the average, but are we, with the virulent strain that has now been introduced as a concept, are we looking at also having a max? Is there a point at which we would be using our ambassadors, our special constables, our enforcement officers to say, okay, that's as many people as can go on this bus in some of the pressure points, and also looking at them as being more ambassadors about dealing with the issues of homelessness, finding shelter on the bus, and mask wearing as opposed to just fare enforcement, as the deputant asked?
Mark, I think, could Mark Miss please answer that?
So in terms of looking at the crowding for where we are now, we have almost 75% of trips have less than 15 customers per vehicle. almost 95% have less than 25 customers, and we have started looking at 70% or 35 customers per vehicle, and only 1% exceed that. So from our perspective, we are looking at that as the upper limit and looking at occurrences, why that occurs. In terms of looking at an operational policy as to limiting the capacity on the vehicle, I think that's something that we can take away and share with you. We don't have a policy at the moment, but it is something that we've heard from yourself, from numerous deputants as well today. So if you'd allow us to take that back.
And also, if I might add in for your information, Commissioner, the data that we have on mask use, we need to get better data about what's happening on vehicles, because the anecdotal information from customer service is that people take their mask off to talk on the phone or to eat, and then they don't put it back on. And so we'll be taking that away as well to find helpful ways to remind people to keep that mask on.
Thank you. So we're going to move to Commissioner Denzel Minalong.
Thank you. So my first question is, there were some deputants that were saying that we should be committing less resources to enforcement. In 2019, what was our revenue loss? It was north of $60 million. Isn't that correct?
So through the chair, that was through an audit done by the Auditor General. That was the amount identified.
And that wasn't including the slippage, the waste that the stealing that was taking place during the rush hour periods. That's also correct, isn't it? So it's higher than $60 million.
I can't confirm that. I'm sorry.
Okay, so let's take $60 million. Mr. Leary, what would you do with $60 million every year?
Through you, Madam Chair, it'd help us invest in providing better and more service on the road every day.
So those folks that are complaining about enforcement officers, and they're also complaining about service, they're actually, there's a conflict there, because if we actually did have everybody paying and not stealing, those people that are stealing, we could actually have more service on our buses, correct? And subways, potentially. Yes?
That's correct, sir.
Okay, great. Let me get back to this. Some of these folks also want to use less enforcement officers and have more people involved in education, and they're concerned about mask use. What are your most recent statistics about mask use? Because I'm on a regular call, and I think your mask use is something north of 95% right now, isn't it?
Yes, that's correct, Commissioner. We are finding that, but it's for when people are entering the bus or subway, or when they're coming off. And the anecdotal information and the complaints our customer service group is receiving many of is that people take their masks off during the ride. And so there is good communications we can do to remind people to keep it on.
Right, but I mean, you've got 95% generally who know how important it is to wear a mask. It's just fine tuning that one a little bit, yeah?
I would agree.
And there are folks that are complaining, some of the deputants were even complaining, and they're using the same sort of weak argument to say that we should be taking enforcement officers off and involving them in, things like mask use, etc. Rick, how many cases have been tracked to passengers who've contracted COVID on the TTC?
At this point in time, through your chair, at this point in time, Deputy Mayor, we don't have any indication of cases coming through the TTC.
So that's a big zero. So in fact, there are 0 cases of transmission that have come from people that are customers that are taking in TTC. In fact, most of the cases that we're finding are from employees. That's like last time I checked was around 150, wasn't it?
Reading now. Through you, Madam Chair, we're in the 270 plus range when it comes to employees that have COVID right now.
Okay. Thanks very much. Those are my questions, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And we'll move now to Commissioner Bradford. Commissioner Bradford, you're up.
Thanks very much, Madam Chair. And see staff, Josie, Rick, everybody, Kathleen, for this fantastic report. It was great to dive into this over the weekend. Lots of information.
Okay, we're having trouble. Commissioner Bradford, we heard your first bit and then we can't hear you now. Commissioner Bradford?
So, yeah.
We can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So I've turned off my video stream to try and help with the bandwidth. Okay, I will proceed. We heard some questions from the deputants around service levels. And I guess I'd like to get an understanding. Obviously, service is down tremendously throughout the year. Ridership is down. However, not all in the same places. There's different patterns to that. I wanted to zero in on ridership weekday versus weekend. And if someone could give me some indication on how we see our peaks during the weekdays versus the weekends ordinarily, and how we're seeing those same levels of ridership play out in the COVID-19 scenario. And to put a fine point on it, I want to understand if we've had the same proportional decrease in ridership between weekday and weekend.
I can answer that through the chair. We're looking at approximately 50% of normal rides on weekday versus weekend, so both are relatively the same. As Mr. DeBrugen said from the York South Weston Tenant Association, there is some variation on routes. The 35J happens to be one of the more busier routes on the weekend, and this is where we are allocating 600s or demand responsive vehicles to accommodate that demand. But for the most part, when we look at this from a crowding perspective, we're seeing that the vast majority is still on the weekday.
Right. So there is still that same sort of, I don't want to call it commuting because that may not be exactly the same, but there is a commute or ridership level that you see Monday to Friday, and then less of the Monday to Friday commuting crowd. Obviously, there's lots of folks still working on the weekend, but it sort of mirrors the typical trends that we saw pre-COVID-19.
Correct, and then both have dropped relatively similarly to about 50% on the bus side of what they were pre-COVID.
And then we are still, as we're responding with our service levels, those 600s you mentioned, we are reallocating buses where we're seeing the highest levels of ridership, regardless of its weekday or weekend. We're putting those resources where we need them to address the ridership.
Absolutely. It's a daily activity that's done by our Transit Control Center, and our research and analytics team provides a report every Friday that identifies how, monitoring how we've done and what is the plan for the coming week. And so they have their list of routes where they prioritize.
Thanks, Mark. I'm going to move to masks because that was the other piece that we heard from a number of deputants out. And I appreciate Commissioner Min Wong's questions there. Just to follow up, how many masks did the TTC secure back when there was the big push for PPE? And how many did we actually get out the door to our riders?
So in terms of riders, there were 1 million masks that were distributed in 2020. In terms of the overall numbers, would have been the million plus our own usage, which I don't have that number, but we will get that for you, Commissioner.
Okay, thank you. So quite a bit. I guess my questions, we heard from folks around a desire to see perhaps fare inspectors doing mask wearing enforcement. Now, from my trips on the TTC, I forget who is answering the question, but I have seen a very high level of mask compliance, just anecdotally, in my riding of the TTC. But I'm wondering, and this might be a city bylaw question, what level of mask enforcement are we doing versus mask education? Because I know, for example, small businesses, there are folks here in the city who are not able to wear a mask for a variety of reasons. And the direction has been, you can have the signs up. Obviously, folks need to be wearing masks, but we're not doing as much enforcement as we are education. That's been the approach in the city. I'm wondering, the TTC, do we enforce or do we educate on mask wearing?
Through you, Madam Chair. Councillor, the TTC's policy is not to enforce. We've been doing nothing but educating and distributing. I'd let you know that fare inspectors and constables on a regular basis have been out in neighborhood improvement areas. I've been there with them, handing out masks on the streetcar and in subway stations. It's all about the education and distribution, not enforcement.
So that would be consistent with the city's approach. That would be consistent with the small business community. It's about education.
That is
Recognize
correct.
a vast majority of Torontonians and customers wearing masks, but some people are, for a variety of legitimate reasons, not able to wear one.
That is correct, Councillor.
So then, Rick, to you, it would be the TTC's position and advice that we want to focus on mask education. We want to focus on connecting people with masks. That's why we had secured so many masks and got over 1 million out, rather than actual mask enforcement.
That is correct, Councillor. In addition, we at all times look to have in the warehouse or in order 6 months worth of masks. So we're always projecting what we need in the future.
Very good. And my final question, Madam Chair, if I may, I wanted to follow up on my motion from last week on the annual service plan. I see that we have a line item funded for the diversity and inclusion and the 10-point diversity plan and additional recommendations from Arlene Huggins. This is funded, as I understand it, which is fantastic news. Perhaps to Ms. Lovita, could you speak to how that funding is rolling out for the 10-point diversity plan in this budget?
So through the chair, so the funding that's been provided has identified the key activities for 2021, but I believe I'm not the best person to speak to that. Is Rupa on? Nope. Gemma? Sorry.
I'll jump in, Councillor. We've set up a training program going into 2021 throughout as we do recertification for operators. We're also looking at training all new non-union personnel. It will take a number of years, as was indicated in the report and through Arlene Huggins. It also identifies the funding for the staffing of the diversity group. So we're looking forward to moving that program along.
Okay, thanks very much, Madam Chair. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you. We're going to move to Commissioner Osborne. Go ahead.
Hi, my question is about capital. I'm not sure if we're doing that section now or if I should hold it.
Yeah, you should hold that if you don't
Thank
mind.
you. Thank you, yes.
Okay. I think that it brings us to the end of our speakers. So we'll move, questions. We'll now move on to speakers on item 1, operating budgets. Any speakers on this? Okay, so Commissioner Law, oh, I'm sorry. I already had a speaking list. I forgot. The Vice Chair goes first.
Thank you, Chair. Appreciate it. So just a couple of comments from me. First of all, excellent report, as everyone has said, and also excellent presentation. I think we got a level of clarity on a number of issues that just went deeper than other times. So thank you to the management team, and in particular to Josie for that. So a couple of themes that I'd like to ensure that we come back to in later reports through the year. And I think I've heard several comments that give me confidence that we will, but I just thought, I just would like to list them. First of all, accelerating the capital work, we've shown there's a positive here. So we've, it's not all bad news. So I think coming back to that, reminding us of that notwithstanding the negative experience COVID has given us, that at least there's some positive. And so just coming back to that theme in the reports that we hear will be, I think, helpful to us. The understanding the ridership behavior, we had, a number of really good comments from presenters. But I was glad to hear, actually, my point was answered by Angela, that I think we need to, we should be digging deeper. We need to understand better what our ridership want and need, because that data is going to help us to provide much better service. On the info technology, I want to just underline the point that state of good repair is not good enough on cybersecurity issues, and I think Commissioner Lalonde was alluding to that. I think we need to dig a little deeper there. And then lastly, on mask, the education, I think there's a limit to what we can do as the TTC, because not everybody's listening to us. And I think we should get our messages about, how to wear a mask properly, including on the TTC, get that message in the messages that the provincial and more senior health people are providing to the broad population. Because like others, I too, as I've ridden the TTC, people take their mask off to eat potato chips. I've seen that lots of times. Or they're doing something else and they take their mask off and then don't put it back on. So I think let's get let's get some of those examples to the spokespeople, the provincial spokespeople and others, to say, don't do this. It's not good for you and it's not good for the people around you. So those were my comments, Madam Chair.
Thank you to the Vice Chair, and we'll move on to Commissioner Lai.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, I'd like to echo all my colleagues on this TTC Commission that it's really great effort from staff to do the budget, and I don't think is a very easy balancing act to increase service while maintaining low fares. So I think you did a very good job in doing that, and perhaps maybe we can still find more efficiency, but during the COVID-19 year, I think this is not a very, very easy task to do. And I'd like to also thank the deputants. You have provided us with a lot of great information that came out of it. Other jurisdiction, how they're doing, and you're doing a good job, and with a passion and about our affordability, and we've heard that. And transit is a key lifeblood for our community and for our city, and it is why we should actually be asking all levels of government to help us. And I'd like to thank the provincial government for helping the TTC with the balancing of the 2020 budget due to the impact of COVID-19. And it's not a very, very easy thing as TTC, because during COVID we have to think about the ridership and all that, and for us to come this far is to be commendable. And as a member of the FCM, which is a Federation of the Canadian Communities, I know that we try to advocate for federal funding on the operation side, but as opposed to just the capital side of things. But I think, unfortunately, we weren't successful. And I know our mayor has always been advocating at the table to get more funding to assist us in this respect. And I'm actually very glad to see some funding allocated to anti-racism and diversity. And it's an important priority for us, especially when I hear about wearing a mask, and some people don't understand why we should be wearing it. So I think we should see some commitment in providing communications in multiple languages, so that some people, to reflect the diversity of Toronto, and some of them, they may not understand in the language. And I think if we can do some education and communication in other languages that reflects Toronto, I think it would be very, very helpful. And I know that is not an easy job, but I think we can always do better. And I will be supporting this budget for this round. And I look forward to helping as a new commissioner. I look forward to helping us to further and to better the TTC budget for the next year. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Lai. We'll move now to Commissioner Bradford.
Thanks very much, Madam Chair. Can you hear me all right with the video, or is that coming through? Okay, I'm gonna just start. I want to echo the comments of thanks and gratitude to our staff, to Josie, Levita, to Rick, to everyone at the TTC for putting what is no doubt a very challenging budget together in light of everything that's going on. The budget at the TTC, as we heard from deputants, is always challenging. It's probably one of the most challenging budgets that any of the City of Toronto divisions or agency has to deal with, and it's certainly one of the pieces that matters the most to our residents. The TTC obviously touches the lives of tens of millions of commuters and customers and residents every year. And there's a lot of tough decisions. There's a lot of capital work. There's a lot of service considerations that we need to work through. And it starts first and foremost at the budget. So note of gratitude to our team here. The budget report in front of us, I think, illustrates the financial efforts that the TTC has taken to keep this city moving over the past year, but certainly into 2021. And highlights the rapidly shifting conditions the TTC has been responding to and adapting to throughout 2020. Clearly, with what we're hearing today, this work will need to continue. The operational challenges cannot be understated. We've had a rapid drop in ridership. We've had changes in transit use, transportation patterns across the city. And as Toronto entered and remains in now another lockdown, it's the responsiveness of the TTC and our senior leadership team that have charted the course to help us weather this storm. I would like to give a special shout out and acknowledgement to Surface Transit, the MVP of 2020. It continues to lead the way in ridership. It continues to connect people in the furthest reaches of our city. And the TTC was able to deliver some really big wins with bus priority lanes and demand responsive service changes. But we know that we have so much more work to do on our surface transit. And I'm pleased that the budget acknowledges this and has a plan in order to do that in the weeks and months ahead. I want to acknowledge that we are freezing fares for 2021. That is the right thing to do. We cannot overstate the significance of that, how that will help folks in this city in what has been an extremely challenging time and will continue to be in the months ahead. And it's also worth noting that, given the hardships faced by this transit commission, the last time fares were frozen, as one of the deputants acknowledged, was back in 2018. And that's a big deal because the cost of operating transit doesn't freeze, right? Like actually the costs continue to go up year over year over year for a variety of reasons. All of that is detailed throughout the line items of the budget, but those costs go up. So to be able to freeze fares, to hold the line on that for our customers, that's a big deal and something I think everyone should be proud of. It's obviously an opportunity to point out that the TTC, one of the largest transit systems on the continent, needs a sustainable funding model. In partnership with other levels of government, you cannot run $1 billion budget on property taxes and the fare box alone. So let's be very crystal clear about this. The challenges that transit has faced over the past number of decades is because we don't have that sustainable funding model. And, if this has opened our eyes up to it and nothing else, then that is very important, significant finding and something that we will all hear at the commission, and our deputants and our residents and our customers need to continue to push the province and the federal government to put those sustainable dollars in place. I think that we're very grateful for the Safe Restart dollars that have come forward. It's a tremendous partnership with the province and the feds, recognizing the precarious nature of what's faced the TTC over the past year. But fundamentally, it is precarious because of the historic funding arrangement carried on the back of Toronto taxpayers and transit riders, our customers. So that needs to change. I will leave it there, Madam Chair. Again, fantastic work by all of our staff, the TTC team. Thank you to the deputants for everyone providing feedback. A lot more work to do in the days ahead, but this is a good start for 2021.
Okay, thank you very much, Commissioner. And we're going to move to the Commissioner with the nicest Christmas tree, Commissioner Carroll.
Thank you. I didn't know we were having a contest.
Well, we are now.
I've been enjoying Commissioner McKelvey's stockings all day.
Yeah, they're nice too.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You know, Madam Chair, we're all still concerned about the fare enforcement $60 million, but the bodies aren't there right now to recover $60 million in fares. So, you know, continuing to strong arm isn't going to do it. But I think what people really mean is rationally, there are those constables on the system, there are those TEOs on the system, but can they balance their approach? They're dealing with things on the system in larger numbers that they weren't before. The homeless is seeking shelter, and as it gets colder, that may get worse. And while the ridership is down, they feel they can. That's a challenge. And it has to be dealt with humanely because we need the people who witness those approaches and referrals to regain their confidence. And we need to actually deal with the fact that they need to be in a better place because we want people to feel comfortable coming back to modes such as the subway. That's why part of the reason the subway ridership is so low. And so dealing with it sensitively means that, yes, we agree with your operating budget and we agree with the number there, but let's make sure that the approach matches the investment and matches what's actually going on the vehicles. In terms of mask wearing, yes, whether we've witnessed it or not, anecdotally, we're hearing about it every day. What do I do about the people who think wearing a mask is an earring or wearing a mask under your chin is somehow keeping your fellow riders safe? We know it's not. And with respect to my colleague, there's really no point at this point in asking, are people getting it on the bus? Well, if 270 operators have it, yes, our own staff are getting it, is the answer to that. Doctors will tell you, any doctor will tell you that transmissions are so high now that there's no longer a point where anything other than your home can be discounted as a distributive environment. The transmission's just there everywhere. Random testing of schools last week, where 30 cases showed up asymptomatic among staff and students in elementary, middle, and high school, shows you that we can't discount any environment. And so making sure that if we're going to invest in the operating budget and those officers, that they're somehow tackling that. To the fare strategy, the COVID overlay that I mentioned, it's really a multi-year thing. We know that we need to bring the frequent rider back to the system, but their work patterns are going to change. So we need to get the best data possible, keep the 5-year fare strategy on schedule, but the overlay is what's the fare instrument for the person who's now sharing office and homework to get it done, because we know that that's probably going to happen for multi-years and in some cases permanent. And so that's got to be looked at. And to the intergovernmental strategy, that 185 million that is still outstanding and a really big question mark, it could be a larger amount. We don't know what's going to happen in the first quarter of this year, but we know we're going to see more lockdown. And so the conversation with the province and the feds needs to be a multi-year conversation. We need to rebuild ridership, and the province needs us to rebuild that ridership and the confidence for them to make sense of any of the promises they've made. We're in this awkward place where a decrease in ridership means they can easily proceed with the capital that they want to do. It's easier to do right now. But if there are no riders there to ride it, what are you building it for? And so we need the province to understand that they need to help us with our ridership costs, our operating service levels, so that we can keep putting people back on the system. And the federal government needs to take a look at the vehicle program, but I'm going to talk about that more in capital. But if I can just wrap with this, Madam Speaker, we have to finally grasp that the only formula that could be made sustainable that would work is something approximating the Bill Davis formula. It is really a waste of time to ask the federal government to build sustainable operating dollars for a municipal transit system into their finances. The Treasury at the federal level simply does not work that way. It doesn't. And so The only thing they sustain through their treasury are their own expenditures. Transfer dollars are done in one-time increments, and the most they can do is political term, especially during a minority government. And that's always going to be the case, which is why the only real sustainable formula is to wake this province up to the fact that they need to be in the operating picture, whether they do it as a combination of federal infusions and their own dollars. It's the province's treasury system that can pay us operating, and the federal government could then take more of a role at the capital level. But that's really how their accounting systems are designed to work. So why not ask them to do what their accounting systems are designed to do? I think we've got to get clear that that is a rational ask, and we're asking them to act on it now. Those are my comments. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. And I'm just going to say a few words. Again, like my colleagues, I want to thank our CEO, Rick Leary, and our CFO, Josie Lavita, who's done an incredible job, as well as the Director of Budgets, Alex Kassar. Really excellent work on this operating budget. So thank you so much on behalf of the whole commission. It's impressive. As we heard our CEO say during his comments, last year the TTC, believe it or not, had 1.7 million customers a day, and that's what we were carrying. And so much has changed. And over the course of this pandemic, we've seen ridership fluctuate dramatically and falling as low as 15% of pre-pandemic ridership. So that's been a pretty hard blow. And what's very impressive about this is even during the most challenging weeks of the pandemic, the TTC continued to serve riders who needed and relied on transit. So I just think this is an incredibly difficult budget year, perhaps the most difficult in our 99-year history. I'm sure we can bet on that. And to see this budget come forward is very heartwarming. So just grappling with all the unknowns. And just, you know, as we move forward into the hopefully sooner than later, the post-pandemic years, how we really adapt. So again, I'd like to just say, I'm so happy to see the TTC responding in an innovative, flexible, and demand responsive way. This has really been exciting to see, you know, as some of you alluded to, our patterns, our needs as a city during the pandemic and beyond, but just the adaptability, the fluidity, I can't say enough about it, the agility, being able just to pivot and shift. I'm seeing that more than ever from the TTC, and that's been really impressive again, and just rewarding to see. Again, the buses are our workhorses. We heard that at council last week, how the buses are our workhorses of the transit system. And it's good to see that we're investing in service improvements there. And again, you know, the TTC's approach to the implementation of modernization strategies and initiatives and significant cost savings. Our cost containment strategy is anticipated to achieve 151 million in savings this year. Again, that's great news when you're looking at a budget really that what they've achieved in this budget in one snapshot. The stark fiscal realities have been balanced by just really providing safe and reliable service to Torontonians who need it most. So that balancing act of dealing with the fiscal realities, but making sure we're achieving that safe and reliable service is where we need to continue to go. My very first interview back, when we were talking about with a major media outlet about you know, my health issues. The one thing I said that I tacked on to that story was the TTC and not wanting to see a fare increase. I generally feel like that every year. It's not always achievable, but I'm very pleased to see how hard the TTC staff have worked to achieve this and to avoid raising fares for our riders. This is, I think, the best news story out of this whole budget, but there's so much more. And as we all of us know, not everybody has the luxury of working at home. And so the people who need it most don't have that option. And we've been there, you know, we're going to be there to support them as we move forward. I also just want to wrap up by saying Really happy to hear my colleagues' comments around the masks. I've been advocating for that since April. Even tried to help get masks in the early days of this pandemic and try to get those rolled out to not just our staff, but to the riders. Masks are, you know, at the end of the day, it's about life or death for people. And I have to say, on behalf of immune suppressed people like myself, you know, the people who are not wearing masks, whether they're staff or riders, that's a big problem. So I'm really, really happy to hear those comments come out of the board today, because you're really advocating on behalf of people who often can't advocate for themselves and are dealing with immune compromised situations. So lastly, I think the quote of the week or the quote of the day would go to our CFO when she said, despite COVID-19, despite the global pandemic, the TTC has made significant progress. So she said that in her presentation earlier. And I just think that's just a quote of this budget, because that's really summarizes beautifully that despite, we're going to hear that word many, many times as we move forward. But despite this global pandemic, this crisis, the TTC has not just dealt with the crisis, but also made significant progress. So way to go. And I will wrap up my comments now and move to item 2. Item 2 is the TTC capital investment plan and capital budget. We've had our presentation on that, so I'm going to move immediately to speakers. No, I'm sorry, questioners, and I've got a list already. So Commissioner McKelvey, if you could please start.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So my first question is about your percentage spend on capital, and I'm just wondering how.
I'm sorry, I forgot something, Commissioner McKelvey. I'm going to come back to you. We actually have to vote. That's our purpose for being here. So we actually have to vote on the operating budget. It's kind of our role. So
yeah, let's do that.
Because I thought
just for kicks and giggles, let's do that.
Okay, so let's do that, guys. So if I could have someone move staff recommendations, Councillor Lai, and all those in favor.
Aye.
Opposed? That carries. All right. My apologies, Commissioner McKelvey, back to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. No, that's okay. Voting is important. My question is about the percentage spend on the capital budget, and how did you do this year on your percentage spend? What are you forecasted to come in around?
So through the chair, this budget is based on the third quarter results, which has a projection associated with it to get to about 89% spending. So we're just waiting to get the results for December. We don't have those yet, but we are carrying forward just over, I think, $200 million as a reflection of that spending pattern. So much of it, we tried to account for much of the slowdown from COVID and the adjustments we made to the capital plan as part of the May adjustment. And so hopefully there's good spend based on what we see here.
Okay. And given, you know, shutdowns that are happening, less traffic, you know, less TTC use, were you able to accelerate any capital projects, and are you able to accelerate anything next year? So for example, you know, the planned shutdowns, this is an ideal time to do that given the ridership's much lower. Has any of that happened, and can any of that happen next year?
So through the chair, there was a slide in the presentation where we did actually increase some front-end funding for more accelerated work in our subway track, and there are more closures being planned to take advantage of the lower ridership, as well as everything that we can do to keep easier access program in compliance.
And that's for 2021?
For 2021, yes.
And were we able to do any of that in 2020?
Absolutely. Yes, we did.
And then my last question is, you know, we were all really excited when the State of Good Repair report came out because we thought it had a good plan, and it was very detailed on everything that would need to happen in the next 15 years, and it came in at $33 billion. But now the state of good repair is 37.7 billion. So it just seems like we're bailing water out slower than we're taking it on. But yet I thought that part of the strategy was to do a big push and catch up and then kind of balance out in some sort of steady state. So could you maybe speak to the state of good repair and how, you know, is there a backlog? Are we getting through the backlog, or are we just, you know, are we kind of at steady state?
So through the chair, I guess there's two points here. The capital investment plan at 33 billion was our first attempt. It was directional. I believe we made a lot of progress in two ways since then. One is we have much more refined estimates. In the presentation, I think I showed you that the profiling of the 15-year period has pretty much shifted based on our ability to look at revised timing, dependencies and such. You're going to get evolution and annual rolling of numbers, but we have made progress. I mean, the very fact that we got the additional funding from City Council last year, you know, most of that all went to state of good repair in our subway as well as our vehicles, because that's part of our requirements. And then this year, the 1.1 billion. So we are making progress, but we are going to continue to, you know, get new information as each of the years come forward. We couldn't have done what we've been able to do within the last two cycles without that infusion of funding, which combined with that in the actions this year is, you know, over $6 billion of requirements being addressed. So we are making progress, absolutely.
So the estimates then are, you know, you've adjusted the timing. Have you made adjustments based on ability to spend as well?
Absolutely. So in the 10-year capital plan, when we reviewed it all, we smoothed things out, meaning the cash flows to align it based on spending. And so as you smooth out on state of good repair, you're essentially pushing out beyond the 10-year period, you know, year by year. On the major projects, we revisited our assumptions and found that there are in case two major garages or facilities that we could push out the timing, which also helped support that, some of which had funding in there. So that's what gave us room to actually move into that room to add some of the new projects that were previously unfunded.
So my last question, does the backlog, does the modeling still show though that you kind of have a hump with a backlog and then we're kind of moving into like a more predictable steady state and kind of a catch up? Like, is there a catch up that is being done?
So if you look back at the slides, sorry, just if you slide 44, you can see that the hump has moved from the front to the back and that you have more of a steady state over the 10-year period. And that's because of the work that we've done in adding money into the capital plan year over year predictability. Are we perfect? No, not yet. And I believe I had indicated in the slides that the one area where we are missing, in addition to our procurement, is additional ongoing funding for our overhaul program, right? That's still sitting below the line beyond 2023. And so that's one area that we'll need to focus on next.
Okay, thank you for an incredible amount of work on this and, you know, taking the state of good repair backlog seriously and you know, it's a great inventory that you have on what needs to be done. So thank you.
Thank you. And we'll move to Commissioner Carroll for questions.
Thanks, Madam Speaker. The question is about the balance between we actually have a lot of investment in it's the slides through 48 through 50. We have a lot of investment, especially if you add in Bloor-Young enhancements, which is so important. But if you add that and the bricks and mortar stuff like bus garages, et cetera, we're spending a lot of money on infrastructure, and we really are getting behind in vehicles. You see that needle shoot way up if you add in vehicles to the backlog. And so I'm wondering if can I take any solace from the fact that doing all of that infrastructure stuff while we're doing that right now means that as funding starts to come in, if we start to catch up the vehicle backlog, that it will shift to where we're investing more in updating the fleet than in infrastructure. Is that the long-range plan to balance this out?
So through the chair, I think we've always said that we had a huge requirement to ensure that our critical state of good repair, especially in our subway system, was a critical need for us. And so we are proceeding within our own capacity to the extent that we can to make sure that all those things are there for safety and reliability purposes. And then, yes, we're starting on the procurement based on the funding that we do have, but the plan then is to balance that out with the other requirements as we continue further into the plan, and hoping to get some additional potential funding support from other orders of government on the rest of the procurement. It has dependencies as well
Yeah.
with some of the other projects that are coming down, through expansion as well.
Right. Expansion will have an impact, an operating impact and a capital impact. But is it safe to say, if we're having intergovernmental conversations and, here with vehicles, we're really looking to the federal government to want us to be ordering vehicles, it's another stimulant in the economy, depending on where we're ordering them from. It creates jobs in more than one place. Are we able to say to them, though, is it safe to say that we're using some of these low ridership opportunities, we're getting the infrastructure up to date, we're managing that backlog such that if they want to invest in vehicle purchases, that ask that we have, the orders that we front-ended, if they want to invest big in vehicle purchases right now, by the time they're paying the invoices, we have solid infrastructure on which to put those. Whoops, someone will get that. Sorry. We do have a solid infrastructure plan such that by the time those vehicles arrive, we've got a good system to add them to.
Through you, Chair, Councillor, that's absolutely correct. We're putting a lot of emphasis on the state of good repair. We've had 2 closures this year, a 4-day and a 10-day. We closed the station for 2 weeks. We've done more weekend and early access work on our infrastructure than ever before. So you're absolutely right. In any discussions that we're having with other levels of government, we do focus on funding the vehicles, as you're well aware, that are necessary for the organization in the very near future.
So is it, Councillor, Commissioner Lai mentioned earlier being at FCM. Is it possible, could we get a report, once we've adopted this budget, could we see a report back that really talks to us about what the proposition is in getting intergovernmental support to go at filling those orders out to where we know we're going to need them to be, so that information can filter out in FCM conversations, big city merit caucus conversations, so that their hydro bus strategy, our subway needs and additional streetcar needs can become a part of the recovery rebuild stimulus conversation that's probably going to roll out in the second half of 2021.
Yes, through you, Chair. Karen, are you on, Karen Thurban? Are you able to just give a little overview of the discussions we're having right now?
Sure. Through the chair. So we've been actually engaging with the City of Toronto, City Manager's Office staff, with the federal government to lay out both our fleet procurement needs in the long term, and also to talk about how we can continue to advocate as they put together their stimulus package that was announced in the federal economic statement just a couple of weeks ago. Also through the city manager's office, we share a lot of information that feeds into the discussions that are happening through the FCM, which the CMO helps coordinate on behalf of the City of Toronto. So we've been working through the various channels to keep feeding that information, but I think it's fair to say that it's in the next couple of months going to be increasingly critical that we keep that on the radar. We know that the April federal budget is a big budget, and that a lot of the commitments around permanent sustainable transit funding that we heard about in the Fed economic statement, we're expecting to hear more about that in that April budget, and continue to make sure that our fleet needs continue to be seen as a high priority in that discussion around stimulus. And so we've been sharing a lot of information about those requirements and procurement timelines.
So that statement may even see a return to a sustainable vehicle purchase program.
That is the hope. We are trying to demonstrate our long-term need, and as I said, I mean, it was interesting to see that the feds actually did identify permanent sustainable transit funding as a part of that statement. So we'll continue to build on that commitment.
Okay, so I've got one part of my return to the Bill Davis formula possibly happening federally. I'll keep my fingers crossed. Thanks.
I don't have any other people to ask questions, so I'll move to the, okay, Commissioner Osborne, I thought you had a comment. Is it a
No,
question?
I have two questions actually.
Okay, go ahead.
As I was reading the material, I had a lurking in the back of my mind the shifting timelines on the Scarborough subway and the state of good repair capital budget that we have. And I'm just wondering how we're feeling about the funded versus unfunded portion of that as timelines are shifting on this project.
Through you, Chair. We have reported out a number of times over the last 18 months about the challenges we're having as you're aware keeping the SRT operating. We will be reporting back in February on a condition assessment with look at options or an option for that right now. So we'll be having that report in February.
Thank you very much. My second question is a level of detail which I hope wasn't in there, but I didn't see it in any case, even if it is, about the elevators, the second or dual elevators that's part of the Easier Access program. If there was capital against those elevators at Finch West and Kennedy stations.
I will start, and maybe Gary can help me. So, Commissioner, that just for clarity, you're talking about the Easier Access Program?
Yes.
So I could tell you that the Easier Access Program is fully funded in the 10-year capital plan. So within the scope, Gary, can you please confirm it was Finch West and so which were the two sites that you were?
Finch West and Kennedy, Josie,
Yes, okay.
the Commissioner was asking about. Finch West is actually an issue we have with Metrolinx just now. They were actually only putting one elevator in at that point in time, and we're in discussions with them just now. When they met ACAT, they originally said that they were actually going to space-proof it for the second elevator, but part of their procurement process only allowed them to actually have the one elevator at Finch West. Kennedy has dual elevators, so it's not an issue. Again, on a bigger scale, we've actually reached out to Metrolinx because of their new architectural standard for the subway programs, and we're having discussions, and that was one of the board action was to speak to them to get clarification on dual elevators or dual paths, accessibility paths at each station. And we're in conversation with them just now to go through their spec because it's a bit confusing at this point in time. So we've had some dialogue with them and hopefully we'll come back to the board with a report sometime in the new year on those expansion projects and accessibility dual accessibility paths at those stations.
Thanks, and may I be, I believe, the final commissioner to add my congratulations to all staff for the really impressive work that was done on this, both the operating and capital budgets. Much appreciated.
And so now I believe we will be moving to speakers. So actually, Commissioner Osborne, do you want to go ahead? Do you want to start or?
I did not have any comments. It was just
okay. So that you wrapped it up. All right. Yeah. So then I would ask Commissioner Carroll to speak next.
Hi. Thanks, Madam Chair. Yes, the question I asked is because there's a sort of a pendulum sometimes that develops in capital. We made, everyone will remember, we made that sort of front end foray into updating the vehicles, but we haven't heard back yet, and we understand that a lot of it is in flux because of COVID and the need to help us with emergency funding. But as soon as possible, because they take so long to produce and so long to deliver. We need to hear from the other orders of government about filling out what is really needed in those orders. I'm really grateful for the slide that shows we've ordered 13, we really need 60, and so on and so forth. Because it gives us a cheat sheet. You could take that slide with the little mode circles and just hand it to every MP and MPP in town, so that they keep top of mind that while we're able to shut down the system during COVID for a weekend and do some work on line 1, while we're able to do Bloor Young because they have invested in that, and we're able to do a lot of state of good repair, the pendulum is going to have to swing from infrastructure over to the vehicle purchase plan. We really need, as one of the deputies said, and the commissioners have said, we need to be able to know that we're constantly renewing our fleet. We know what it needs. We spend too much money on extreme overhauls on vehicles that are really ready for retirement, but we've got to have an easy shorthand way of saying that to other orders of government. And to me, Build Back Better means that right now, COVID is kind of presenting us the opportunity to make it clear to them that building back the system, both operating and capital, are only going to work if we return to that formula where we're seeing a larger investment in not only vehicles, but the whole system on the capital side from the feds, and a real partnership with the province in terms of operating the system, so that we are not only building the infrastructure at the vehicles, but also building the confidence in the system and its service levels. That's the scenario under which Premier Bill Davis proceeded with expansion projects. You need that confidence in the system on the operating side, so that the riders will be there when you finish building that subway. Who's going to get on a Scarborough subway if they haven't been on a subway for 2 years because they have no confidence in it? Who's going to get on beautiful hydro buses if they don't believe we're keeping safe service levels as we build back? So getting that partnership formula back in place, where we got a bigger capital investment from the feds, and finally, after 25 years now, it's 25 years now since we have predictable operating funding from the province, that's when we'll get back to the system that was admired all over North America and indeed the world. And the Build Back opportunity and intergovernmental conversations, to my mind, is a platter being handed to us. Tell them you know a way to build back better. Don't reinvent the wheel. Just bring back that formula that we haven't seen since prior to 1995. Those are my comments, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. And I don't have any other speakers, so I would like to speak for a couple minutes. So again, I want to thank our CEO, our CFO, and of course the Director of Capital Accounting, which is Jennifer, and the entire team who worked on these plans and these budgets. And again, great job. The board approved the TTC's first ever 15-year capital investment plan in February 2019, and since that time we've successfully secured $5.7 billion in funding to address many previously unfunded projects. And so that progress sounds amazing, and it is. It's very encouraging. This updated plan presented to us also indicates we're still grappling with significant unfunded capital needs to the tune of $23 billion over the next 15 years. So this has to remain, in my opinion, a high priority, a top priority for this board and commission to get us to move forward. So, you know, let's keep pushing for that critical infrastructure, those projects. I know that's challenging when we're, you know, ridership's down, but we need to keep pushing ahead for the future of the city. I can't help but bring up the asbestos removal and the capital works project. Again, acceleration. And some of you have also mentioned this, but such great work, shaving years off this project. And I just want to highlight Rick's leadership on that, as well as Megan McCrae, who did a lot of work on this, as well as Fort Monaco. Bravo to all three of you for this, because it's this type of creative thinking that's going to help us get through many difficult months that we probably have ahead of us. So thank you. And I just want to tag on comments that I neglected to say earlier. And I wanted to thank the provincial and federal partners for their funding contribution, totaling $776 million through the Safe Restart Agreement. And with this assistance, all 2020 COVID-19 impacts will be covered. So that's very encouraging. And I have to say, it's encouraging to see all levels of government coming together and recognizing the critical service that the TTC's provided throughout the pandemic and the role it plays in our city's recovery. We have to think about that too. It's an integral role, really, public transit will play in Toronto's recovery. So I do want to thank Karen Thorburn, who's been a real asset to our TTC team on her work with the other levels of government, other orders of government, I should say. Pam McConnell taught me to say orders, not levels. So that was a good lesson as a newbie counselor many years ago. And I just want to wrap up by simply saying thank you to everyone at the TTC, every single member of the board, the commission, as well as the staff and our crews out there. Thank you everyone for your involvement in getting through this year. And of course, the creation of the budgets that are before us. I want to thank the deputants. I think we had some great comments today and we all listened carefully and staff were taking notes. So thank you. But I do want to thank my fellow members of the TTC board for really paying close attention to what we're trying to do here at the TTC. And I just think we're making significant progress and it's very exciting. So I just want to thank the TTC staff from the bottom of my heart for really navigating an unbelievable year. There's no way to describe this year. There's not a nice word you can use to describe this year. So thank you from the CEO to the staff that are out there, really making the system work. Thank you so much for your contributions and getting us through this. I know we have months ahead, but it's been some years. So I want to wish everyone best wishes for a safe, very, very safe and happy holiday. And I want to say good riddance to 2020. Goodbye. So that's my comments. And now I actually will move the motion to adopt staff recommendations on this item 2. So I will move that, adopt staff recommendation. All those in favor, put your hand up, please. Against? I see no one against. So that's great. Thank you, everyone. And that is officially adopted. So unless there's any other comments, we are now ready to adjourn. So have a very wonderful season to everyone, and thank you for your time and your hard work. All right, bye-bye, everyone.
Happy holidays,
everyone.
everybody.
Thanks, Madam Chair.
Happy holidays. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, best of the season.
Happy holidays, everyone.